First day of our joint appropriations interim committee meeting for October 25th. We will go ahead and start with our 1 o'clock agenda item, which is state employee compensation distribution update. Mr. Richards, please proceed.
Madam Chairman, members of the committee, Don Richards, Legislative Service Office, Budget Fiscal Administrator. The committee had requested a summary of the impacts of the 2023 Budget Bill Section 329 employee compensation. So I will give an introduction and then hand that over to the colleagues in the executive and judicial branch. First of all, by way of background, most of the members were present in the 2022 budget bill. Section 319 provided an appropriation of $64,800,000 general funds. And that resulted in a distribution of an average 7.97% compensation increase to base pay in July 2022. That was last year. The executive branch ran a similar analysis and came up with roughly the same number of 8%. Then fast forwarding to the 2023 budget bill, Section 329 appropriated $48.85 million in general funds. Once again, the Department of Administration and Information and LSO did a separate analysis, recognizing that DA&I has, Department of Administration and Information, has more detailed data than LSO is privy to. Nonetheless, the results were quite similar. We calculated an average increase to base pay of 9.72%, and A&I calculates 9.8%. Statewide. Agenda material item number 7-01 provides a breakdown by agency of those distributions. And you can see that these were distributed based on merit and market and were not equivalent across all agencies. You will also see when you add the total, it far exceeds the amount that was appropriated. And the reason for that is it's inclusive of federal funds and other funds which were allocated in the same proportion as general funds. So that explains the increase. I did want to add one more comment, and that's on attachment D of item 7-01. And this is the distribution of the compensation funds for higher education, community colleges, and the University of Wyoming. And the reason I point that out is there is a fairly notable difference in the percentage increases at those institutions compared to the executive and judicial branch. The explanation for that is there is no requirement for education or higher education institutions to match their general fund allocation with a commensurate amount of other funds, property taxes, tuition, federal research grants, and the like. In some cases, those general fund amounts were supplemented, but not in all cases. That is not necessarily the case in all enterprise activities, bookstores, food services, and the like. So you will see across the board, the higher education institutions provided on average less than the executive or the judicial branch in terms of their compensation. Keep in mind the appropriation for fiscal year 24 was 1 year of the biennium. All of this is ongoing and sustained and will be rolled into the standard budget of all entities, including higher education. One last comment, and that is you also provided up to $8 million per year for bringing up all the vacant positions. That was part of your action here as the Joint Appropriations Committee. I have been told, I don't have any specific information, that not only were all of those vacancies brought up to the market pay, but a fraction of the $8 million per year will be included. That is one example of an overestimate, of which there were many, of next year's standard budget. Frankly, the executive branch, I think, took a fairly conservative viewpoint of that. We had anticipated up to 16 million would be rolled in, and I understand that the final number will not be that full amount. Beyond that, Mr. Chairman, or Madam Chairman, excuse me, I have no further comments, would stand for questions and turn it over to the representatives of the judicial and executive branches.
Thank you, Mr. Richards. Questions for Mr. Richards?
Madam Chairman.
Senator Kinski?
Yes, Don, remind me, the 48,850 was an annual, not a biennial number. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, that is correct.
And Don, on top of the 97.7 biennial number, do we have to add the payroll burden that is Social Security, pension, workers' comp, UI, or is that included in the 97.7 calculation?
Mr. Richards?
Madam Chair, Senator Kinski, it's included in. So it's-
Representative Larson?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Dawn, previous to making these adjustments, we had a number of funded positions that they had taken funding from those positions to help address pay compensation gaps. And so we had those positions where the statutes, but perhaps underfunded. Are you telling me that then in all of this, I think I understand that correctly, that those were all then brought back up to the appropriate level of funding for the position that they were created for?
Madam Chairman, Representative Larson, I don't believe that is true. I think all vacant positions were brought up, and I would defer to the executive branch, but there was some threshold line. If it was below 30% or 50% or something, I think there are still a few positions out there that were not fully funded. And I shouldn't say a few, there were some positions.
Okay.
Madam Chairman,
Representative Stith?
Madam Chairman, Don, my recollection was when we crunched the numbers in December and January, that it was going to amount to about an 8% increase, but it looks like it was 9.7. What explains the difference? Did I simply misunderstand what we were doing last January?
Mr. Richards?
Madam Chair, Representative Stith. I think I would best leave that to the executive branch. We were always kind of under the impression that it would be somewhat higher. And I think in their memo, they do reference kind of a two-step process. And so I think the language regarding the 8% was related to the first of the two steps and was not inclusive of the second step, but I'll kind of leave that to the executive branch to flush out. But I can recall discussions that there appeared to be sufficient funds for something in excess of that 8%.
Any additional questions for Mr. Richards? All right, with that, we have on our agenda Director Bach, but I see the chief, the governor's chief of staff is here. Drew Perkins. Mr. Perkins? Our co-chair.
Actually, well, if I may, Madam Chairman, can we call up some of our friends to answer these questions?
Director Bach, please come forward. And I see we have Aaron Williams, Human Resources Administrator as well. Welcome. Feel free to proceed with your testimony however you see fit.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Co-Chair Nicholas. The first thing, my name is Patricia Bach, I'm Director of A&I. I'm here with Aaron Williams, the HRD Administrator, who certainly has much more detail than I do. But I did want to mention a couple things. One being that I have heard from directors all the way down to the lowest level employee in state, how much this has helped over the past 2 years. And actually, most of them pretty surprised that the legislature was able to get it through this second time, and they do appreciate it. I want to make sure that's out there. There were some issues, as always, when we deal with compensation, with compression and things like that, that we might be able to fix at a later date. But today we're here to talk about how 1 and 2 looks for the state. And I'll turn that over to Aaron Williams, and she'll be able to kind of go through that and address Representative Stiff's question on, I think the last time we were here, well, in January and December, it was 10 versus 7, and we had that discussion. So I'll turn it over to Aaron Williams so that she can clarify those issues.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. As you remember, the Human Resources Division in A&I came to you with a problem. We have been experiencing historic difficulties in recruiting and sustaining our workforce. One notable reason, of course, is the wage gap between state employees and our competitive labor market. So when we first approached you with our 3-phase recommendation, we were operating on 2017 pay tables. The last implementation of raises we distributed this past July We have successfully implemented the 2022 pay tables, so we definitely appreciate your support catching us up, between 5 to 7 years behind of the relevant labor market. The solution that we put forward in conjunction with the governor's office and state budget department was to spread our plan over 3 years. The first phase focused on retaining current staff. This last phase, the second phase, focused on continuing to move employees closer to market while also putting an emphasis on recruiting and filling vacant positions. And so I've worked for the Human Resources Division for 25 years. These phases are the first time I've ever seen us putting money towards vacant positions, which that is going a long way to helping recruit and retain those employees. And so we definitely appreciate the inclusion of those vacant positions in these distributions. We won't talk today on phase 3, but the third phase shall focus on just developing a sustainable compensation model. Now that we have caught up, it's our intention to continue to move employees closer to market, ease compression, and then hopefully work with you all to get a sustainable model in place so we don't have to come in for large sums of money playing catch up in the future. Madam Chair, Representative Stiff, I'm going to not focus too much on phase 1. I'm going to get into phase 2 and address some of the specific questions that you had. We had 5 steps that we implemented with phase 2, very similar to what we did in phase 1. We adjusted the pay tables to the 2022 market figures. All employees whose current pay rate fell below that new minimum, the first step we did was get everybody to the minimum of that pay table. Then we implemented the market merit matrix. And so Representative Stiff, when you're talking about our original percentage, we talk about the overall percentage increases and then what the cost of the merit percentage is, and that's kind of where the difference comes in. And then we moved employees to 90% of the new market rate. And so we developed a new minimum threshold. I think what happened in the first year, we asked for 83% of the minimum. We wanted to get all existing employees there in vacant positions. Phase 2, we were asking to, continue to stop playing at the bottom of the pay tables. That's where a lot of agencies' positions were budgeted. It made it really difficult for them to recruit and retain. If you had a long-term state employee who was at 85, 87% of market, and we gave you 90% to move your vacant positions, that's really hard for an agency to make that decision to hire somebody new above existing employees. And so we've made a policy decision that vacant positions and all employees with the funding move off of the bottom of the pay table to that minimum of 90%. With some additional dollars we had, of course, when we asked for the money, things are still moving, vacant positions, promotions, reclasses, things happen. There was some additional funding left. And so we always talk about the hard to recruit, the classifications that always end up on our top 10 high turnover classifications. They're always our lowest paid individuals, our custodial crew, our food services workers. They're the ones that are continually competing with McDonald's for positions at $17 an hour. We took some additional funding and we looked at our employees that were at the lowest pay bands. We had also done this in phase 1 with pay grade C, move those lower employees up. We assigned pay grade C to a minimum of $15.50 an hour. We felt that to be competitive with McDonald's and some of the other employers, that with that extra money, we wanted to move those lower employees to a minimum of $15.50 an hour. Or an increase equal to or greater than $300. We had some employees who were still very far away from market who didn't get a large percentage increase just by the nature of their classification level. And so we did the $15.50 or $300 minimum raise to help with recruiting and retention in those lower pay grades. So the average increase after the move to minimum and the matrix step, those first 2 steps, that was 7.9%. And then the average increase after the distribution plan, where we did some things for our employees that were further away from market in our lower pay bands, that's what takes that to that 9.8%. Anybody have any questions?
Representative Stiff.
Madam Chairman, this, and the absolute numbers do ring a bell. So if I understand the math right, we have $48.85 million per year, and then we have the extra $8 million for the vacancy positions. So is it accurate to say that when the standard budget comes out here in a month or so, that there will be an additional approximately $113 million additional payroll in the standard budget than there was, last cycle?
Mr. Chairman, the standard budget will be adjusted to the appropriated amount. That $8 million is not in our Chapter 17 adjustment. We may be having a conversation later about that through exception request, but no, it's strictly the appropriated amount. And speaking to support to Administrator Williams' comment, the 8% average is true because the budget amount is 8% to the actual amount of the budget. If you start counting positions and saying how many of these lower paid positions got higher increases, that changes it. Plus the fact that vacant positions didn't get merit increases. So there's your explanation. So I support Administrator Williams' comments.
Madam Chairman, if I can follow on that just for a minute, one of the things we wanted to make sure was, particularly in the lowest paid individuals, they ended up, many of them got more than an 8% raise. We dealt with the 8% as kind of the overall number because that was, I think, what the committee is most comfortable working with, Madam Chairman. And so as we went forward and did that, what you have is obviously getting, if you're getting, and we had these discussions internally, and I remember specifically I remember specifically saying to our group as we were working this, I don't care if the lower paid people get an 8 or 9 or 10% raise, because we need to bring these lower people up. A 10% raise at somebody who's making $12 an hour is only $1.20. So we were trying really hard not to be stuck on that number. We were trying to bring people up. And so we had in the 5 steps, I think 3 of the steps were addressed, all trying to bring up our lowest paid people to have a wage that would attract and retain. And we've had some successes. We have fewer vacancies in, for example, our janitorial staff than we've had in quite a while, in large part because we've been able to do this. And so the point of that is that making sure that we made sure that a significant part of this money is allocated to lower paid people skews the average raise numbers significantly.
A couple of different questions on that. So in discussions with LSO, it's my understanding that because of the vacancies, but if nothing changes going forward, there'll be a significant reversion on June 30th. Is that accurate?
Mr. Chairman, are you speaking to the reversion of the existing budget because we have vacant positions? If that is, yes, we do anticipate a significant reversion because we're just simply not filling all the positions. I think the compensation package helped stem that, but we're still going to have reversions.
And that's then my next question then is, how much of those vacancies, or are any of those vacancies being used to give, the vacancy dollars that aren't being expended because you have vacancies? How much agencies are using part of that, or are they using part of that for what would be step 3 or step 4? And if so, how do we understand what that is and how much that is and who's getting it?
Madam Chair, Representative Nicholas, I think I can take a stab at that. So we have put in our compensation policy that agencies can't fill or recruit for positions lower than 90%. And so the issue that we had in the past where agencies were defunding positions, to 0 or lower than that, our policy does not allow that to happen anymore unless there's an exception or something that needs to be made. We have worked with a few agencies where the employees, when they're hired, they may not have passed the state bar or they're in training at the law enforcement academy. And so until they meet those requirements, they may bring them in a little lower and then move them throughout the course of their probationary period to that 90%. But in our compensation policy, those vacants can't be defunded below that 90%.
But my understanding is on the vacancies, we funded those at the enhanced rate. In other words, we gave pay raises to positions that weren't filled. So you've got the money for that. What I'm curious about is, are you taking funds that aren't being expended because they're vacant and using that to do any other further enhancements within agency or additional pay raises to address compression or anything like that?
Mr. Chairman, may I please? We're still implementing section 310. It still rides out there and we enforce it. There's a scarce, limited number of positions that you will see in exception requests where that issue took place. We will bring that in front of you and explain the motivation behind that. So that's in process right now.
And Ma'am, Co-Chair, that's just my question. I'm not saying that it's good or bad. I just kind of want to know that we know what you're doing and then it's kind of just explain to us how you're doing it. In some of the information that you provided to us, you indicate that you're not going to need any extra money to help address parts of level 3, level 4 and the compression issues. I'm going, well, how are you going to do that? How are you going to pay for it? So I'm just trying to understand how you're doing it.
So, well, I think the second part of, Madam Chairman, if I may, addressing all, Aaron will, I think Aaron and Kevin can address the second part of your question. The first part of your question with respect, I think there are a few exceptions. One of the primary exceptions is I think is Department of Corrections, and they have that superflex that they've had for a number of years to try and address some of the issues. So there's some very specific instances where that is being looked at and that is happening to some degree. But other than that, we're enforcing the section 310 limits and not allowing that there with very, very few exceptions. Those exceptions, as Kevin said, are going to will be identified and brought to you so you know exactly what we're doing. And before I turn it over to Aaron, I'll just say that one of the things we try to be very, very careful about is we recognized that there was a certain amount of trust that you placed in us to implement this. And we've tried very, very hard to make sure that we played it straight down the line, that we didn't do this so that we can continue to have that trust that when we come and bring you a problem and that we'll take it and we'll go fix the problem as the way we've indicated. And in one of the instances, and I'll just add this, is that I think we've got over 400, we've got 430 some classifications across the enterprise. I think we got a mid to a high A in addressing those. I think most of the classifications, I think it came out pretty well. We have identified several that for whatever reason, moving them to the market just doesn't work. And you've heard about some of those nurses. Nurses are one, engineers. You've heard about that with environmental engineers. We've heard, you may have heard about that with the Attorney General's office and some of those things. So we actually had some money that we didn't apply, some of the general fund money we didn't apply directly, about $2.2 million that we then went back and applied to try and address some of those ones that just didn't work by moving on the pay scale. And we did what we could with that. We didn't address those fully. And so you'll see some exception requests that come before you in budgets to try and address some of the rest of those numbers. But we've tried to be very clear about this and be very, very strict in our enforcement, and whatever exceptions that we made will be identified and we'll be able to have that discussion as we move forward in the budget.
Perfect. Thank you.
Madam,
I will turn the meeting back over to Mr. Co-Chairman, who just arrived late, and
Thank you.
We're
I'm
fine.
sorry I was late. I don't practice a lot of law anymore, but today I did. I got stuck. Go ahead. It's a spooky thought. Isn't it?
So Mr. Chairman, Madam Chairman, and I don't, along that same line, historically, we've used some of those funded vacancies to help the various agencies then pay when people retire for the unpaid vacation and it's even in with this new policy or that you've adopted that they can't tweak that more than 90%. Is that still sufficient that you're able to meet those requirements? Am I making sense there? Because we can't move that unless you've got that super flex. So
Mr. Chair, I think, and Representative Larson, I would think that we would still be okay. Because if those vacants and the amount of vacants that we have generally in most of the agencies, the smaller agencies will always struggle with that. And I think the budget department has an answer for that. But one of the issues I think we're kind of dancing around is in the past, myself as a director, without having the ability to give somebody a raise or bump them up, we have taken positions down and given a raise or an increase to another set of folks. That has happened in the past. That was needed at that time for the directors to have some flexibility. We have since clamped that down in the comp policy. So not only do they have to keep it at 90, you can't take that money and give it to another one and then take it down to 89 even. So I want to make sure that that's clear, that that's not a possibility anymore.
So one of the discussions that, that part of us had informally over the last day or two, if we look at some of the reversions that will show up in June 30th, to capture a certain amount of that, to put it in a pot for those small agencies. So if you were warm to that idea, it might be helpful if you kind of put together a little package for us you could present to us in December. How much that would be and how it refills or backfills, because just putting money aside will only work temporarily, but there needs to be a fill component to it as the money are expended.
Mr. Chairman, I do think that would be helpful, very helpful. We've talked about that for quite a while, probably.
And we talked about it last year, but the number was fairly significant. But if we did it just for smaller agencies and on a select basis, it would be a lot more manageable, I think, for all of us. And because the larger agencies do have different abilities and cash flow, and that kind of makes sense. Go ahead, Kevin.
Mr. Chairman, we keep our eyes on those smaller agencies and those agencies that have unproductive time payout, sick leave and vacation. When we turn the corner next April, we will look at the enterprise and we'll identify any of those situations where they experience that issue. And we will facilitate that issue with the B11, moving funding from where it would exist to where it needs to be in the 100 series control methodology. And we spoke earlier, we do anticipate a significant amount of reversions this biennium. I don't believe that that's going to stop happening. I don't think that we're going to all of a sudden find ourselves at the place where we're 100% employed. So basically what this is simply understanding that we know there's funding out there available. We know that there's going to be unproductive time payouts. When they exist, what we will do is communicate that to you through the B11 process for those small agencies. We did that 2 Aprils ago, and there was, I think, 2 agencies that needed assistance. And the assistance actually came from the state budget department and the auditor's office because we were able to use ARPA dollars rather than our general fund dollars. So we facilitated those corrections in that fashion.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question is in regards to the note here on our LSO document that Gillette College did not receive any state aid for the pay raises because those employees were considered new employees as Gillette College is separated from Northern Wyoming Community College. And I guess that kind of doesn't make sense because it would be as though Mr. Sheehan behind you is no longer with ETS. He's now with A&I because A&I has absorbed ETS and considering him a new employee. So I guess I don't track why somebody wasn't able to go back and understand if this employee had been working for Northern Community College prior to the separation, because it seems like it puts Gillette College at a disadvantage in almost a punitive fashion. So some information on that would be great.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Walters, unfortunately, we wouldn't have that ability. It has to come from the college commission to say how they allocate it. Just like with other entities, we do the executive branch here for state employees. I think it's a great idea how we did it with everybody in the same pot, but we really don't know how they allocate it. So this is the first that I've heard of that. So I can try to get that answer, and I think Ms. Caldwell was here earlier.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, and Representative Walters, as I understood it, it is the provision in statute that Campbell County does not impose the 4 mills. And until you impose the 4 mills, you're not eligible for state funding. So that, I think, is the nuance with respect to Gillette College.
Mr. Chairman. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do have a couple of questions. And what I'm shooting for here is between now and December is to try to get a baseline of information. And I think we're kind of all dipping around it, but I want to go back a little bit. And during the last couple of years when we were facing challenges, getting people, we, allowed a certain latitude. And we were talking about earlier about using different ways to retain people. What I'm looking for is to make sure that as we did bring everyone up to market, that we accounted for all those raises that were given out so people wouldn't walk out the door, to make sure that we equalized everything across the enterprise as best we could going forward. So if I can, kind of try to track that, that would be one piece of information that'd be helpful. Also, and I'm referencing now the workforce report dated June 30th, 23, that lists 7,287 employees across for fiscal year 22-23. That's the employee number, and you see a 10-year average. Want to make sure that I'd like to get a number, where we are now, and so if that number is the right number, great. So that would be a help. And then also, one more if I can, just to follow up, trying to make sure that we have, I'm trying to put this, that we have that baseline information going forward. So that way, let's just say, and I'm just spitballing here, but that folks ask for new employees in different departments. So as we talk about raises and things going forward to pull back to market, that we all have that baseline of information. And according to this report, 10 years ago, we had 8,400 employees. Today, we, as of 22-23, we have 7,287, quite a bit less. And so as we move forward, I want to be able to look at those numbers. How many, if we're adding people, making sure that we're doing it with the pay system that is tracking all that from previous and going forward. Does that make sense? What I'm looking for as we put that together. So the point on all this, Mr. Chairman, is that if whatever we do, when we go to the floor, we have to defend it. And I want to try to be able to, whether we do it or not, whatever we end up doing, that we do so with a baseline of information that we can all use and that we can all use going forward. So when we get asked questions, when people come to us, and even departments, when they come to us to ask for these things, that we can have a baseline of information to work from. And that's what I'm looking for. So what you can answer now is great. What you can't answer today, if you could prepare for our meetings in December, that'd be great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chairman Nicholas, Senator Guru, I think you will find some of that information in the report that we have provided, the State of Wyoming Executive Branch Plan Summary. And so as we continue with and I'm going to speed along, I know we're taking a lot of time, but I think we've broken it out, what the outcomes of phase 1 and 2 per your last request, what we've been able to accomplish. And so we have it really clearly with percentages, phase 1 and phase 2, how many employees received raises in each phase. And then we go into, we've provided substantial raises to the vast majority of state employees. Phase 2, the count was 7,512 employees received something. There's a reduced wage gap between the employees and the current market. So we kind of analyze the average employee pay and what that has looked like over the past years. And it goes into the different occupational groups and classification families. As we proceed forward, I think the big thing is kind of gauging, has what we have asked to do actually really worked and we've accomplished what we've set out to do. And I think the main goal of what we've been trying to accomplish is moving employees away from the bottom of the pay range closer to the market policy position. And if you look at page 19 of that report, we had phase one, 662 employees at 80 to 85% of the market, and 3,209 employees were between 85.1 and 90%. With the implementation of phase one and phase two, all of our employees now, as we've talked, are at 90%. And so 4,887 employees are between 90 and 95% of market. And then we have another 1,300 between 95 and 100%. So they're getting right to where we're feeling is the sweet spot of those market rates. A lot of agencies come to us and they'll say, the hay isn't working or your pay ranges aren't adequate. I need to pay $19 an hour. Well, our pay ranges maybe go from $18 an hour to $26 an hour. That market policy position is $19 an hour. So the hay methodology and our ranges we're finding are appropriate. We just have historically paid below the market rate. So by getting to where those MPPs are, we're finding a lot of agencies that's hitting that spot where they need to be competitive with other state as well as local employers. That leaves the remaining 1,259 employees, between 100 and 120% of market. What this does do, like you have discussed, Chairman Nicholas, is, there's compression that we need to address. We are working with agencies now. That is going to be part of our phase 3 recommendation. We haven't talked yet what those costs look like or where that funding could potentially come from, but we have a lot of very eager agencies who are saying, hey, I'm paying contractors. We have a lot of overtime. If I can get these positions filled, I think I can ease some compression and fix some of this stuff with our existing funds. And as Chief Perkins mentioned, we're working with the governor's office and the budget division closely. If agencies can do that now, we're working with them to be able to try to do that. We've stabilized turnover per the compensation, the workforce report that you have referenced. And so in 2019, 2020, we were at 17.6% turnover, and that includes transfers. In 2021, 2022, we came to you panicking that was the highest turnover we have historically seen at 24.8%. We are pleased to announce that in the 2022, 2023, we're heading back down 18.6%. So we're trending in the right direction. That's definitely attributable to phase one. I think it's still too early to see the effects that phase two had, but I'm hoping and anticipating that's going to drive even further down. We have positive recruiting. We're getting more applicants that we were. We're hearing from agencies they're more qualified applicants, and so that's good news to hear as well. The Human Resources Division has hired a recruiter with the abilities we have with consolidation. We've taken a position and repurposed it, and a lot of really good work has been done with her position and the agencies to really push some recruiting efforts that I think have attributed to that as well. So in summary, I'm just going to close with saying, with your assistance, the work with the governor's office and budget division, I think phase one and phase two have been extremely successful. Employees have received substantial increases that I think we have been able to retain. A lot of the workforce that we were fearful we're getting ready to leave. With the support of the governor's office, the Wyoming legislature, wages are currently as competitive as they've been in recent years. So we just want to thank you for your support.
Mr. Chairman. Yep. Just one more. So the 18.6 you just quoted, that includes transfers as well.
That does.
Thank you.
Chairman Nicholas, yes, that's in the workforce report as well, and I can point you in that direction.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Two quick questions. One is related to the recruiting efforts. So you mentioned the slowdown in turnover. Are any of our previous employees coming back? That's one question. And the other question is, in the interest of recruited and retaining, do we have a program of offering, I know we do for custodians, but I'm talking about like risk environment, risk work environment, or special condition, special work condition? Do we have that in the package?
Chairman Nicholas and Representative Henderson, I'm going to turn this over to Jared Hansen. His department is the one who's worked with agencies. We've implemented a lot of tools in the HR toolkit to enable agencies to be able to recruit and retain. We have sign-on bonuses. We have worked with agencies. We've discussed an option for, how do we recruit and retain snowplow drivers. And so I'm going to turn it over to Jared because he has specifics of what we've done and what's available to agencies.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Henderson, Jared Hansen, Program Manager with the Human Resource Division. As Administrator Williams just shared, we've implemented some changes to the state of Wyoming compensation policy. Some of those changes include referral bonuses, hiring bonuses, some of those key aspects. One thing that we actually implemented in between phase 1 and phase 2 was a critical staffing level add-on. For our compensation policy, it allows the administrator to approve kind of an other category, and that wasn't a specific line item mentioned in the policy, but we were open to that because we realized that some occupations really operated at a critical staffing level. So anyone that exceeded 25% or more, we actually worked with the agencies to implement a critical staffing level add-on. Now that was really a stopgap measure until we could implement phase 2, until we could become more, we could get more in line with current market, which we've successfully done as of July. So that critical staffing level add-on ceased at that time, but we are still open and having conversations with agencies about how we can, implement something similar under similar criteria moving forward.
Mr. Chairman. Looking at page, I think 21 or the very last page of the materials that have been provided, the state compensation plan summary. I think that last paragraph is pretty important for the committee to focus in on, and then also the chart of that classified employee count over time. I think certainly this is some of those tools to take to the floor to defend the position here, is to see that overall decline over the last even few years. But I noticed looking at May of 23, right, from March of 23 to May of 23, that is a very steep decline, even though it's just a short window of time. And I think that the page 21 speaks to some of that, but could you speak to that very precipitous decline here in March to May of 22 or 23?
Mr. Chairman, Madam Co-Chair, we can go back and look at some specifics. We have worked with the state auditor's office, and this is mentioned a little bit in that same summary about modifying termination codes. For a long period of time, we did not have really good data as to why people were leaving the state of Wyoming. And in the last year, we have worked with the state auditor's office to make some of those termination codes a little bit more meaningful. And so I like to think a year from now, if we sit down, we could tell you exactly why people were leaving, and we'd have really good data. At that point in time, we were still just starting to implement some of those new termination codes. So I don't know the specifics behind why there was that sharp decline. It was around that time, May 1st was our cutoff period for the phase 2 implementation. So I don't know if that attributed to some folks leaving or not, but we could certainly look into that and provide you some additional information.
Madam Co-Chair, I think Jared's absolutely right. We'd be able to get more specifics on that, but I do think we've had some periods of hiring freezes or slowing down. And I think that was going on during that time period, but we'll get you the specific data.
On this particular issue. All right, thank you very much. Next, we have the judiciary, I believe.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Elisa Butler. I'm the State Court Administrator for the Wyoming Judicial Branch. First and foremost, I think what we want to say from the judiciary is thank you. Similar to the executive branch, we have heard from a vast number of our employees about how much the compensation over the last 2 years has helped boost morale. That's especially true coming out of the pandemic. Our courts worked really hard, as did our employees, to keep the court doors open during that time. So thank you. That it has been a really large morale boost for our team members. But, and there's always a but, right? There's more work to be done. And so as a way of background, over the last 2 years, the judicial branch has worked to create a classification and compensation structure for judicial branch employees. Before this, there's never been a class and comp structure for the judicial branch or for judicial branch employees. When the executive branch went through that process many, many years ago to create their structure, the judiciary didn't participate. And so the last 2 years, we've had a couple of folks from our team working really hard to create that same structure for the judiciary using the Hay methodology. So Claire Smith, who was our CFO and deputy administrator, and then Brenda Reedy, who is our HR manager, have worked really hard and in collaboration with HRD over the last 2 years to create that structure. And what we have found after creating that structure is that judicial branch employees lag behind in terms of compensation than their counterparts in the executive branch. Part of that, a big part of that is due to the fact that without that compensation structure or classification structure, we were unable to really dig into the positions that we have within the judicial branch and classify them appropriately. And so when the appropriations were made over the last 2 years, what happened was we got a similar percentage as the executive branch. So you heard today, 8% average. And I don't know that we got quite 8%, but it was a percentage of our average compensation. And so it was not geared toward actual positions. So basically what that means is that we're behind. We're behind the executive branch. I can say confidently today, which is fantastic, that we know that based on the fact that we now have a classification and compensation structure. On average today, our employees are at 83% of market on average. Obviously, some are above, some are below. Our lowest paid employee as of today is at 81.5% of market. We have a very few employees that are at 100 or above or are actually at market. And so, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, we did provide a handout and we actually provided you with an updated one today. And that shows you basically where our employees sit after the 2 rounds of compensation over the last 2 years. So some highlights of this, prior to 2020, the 2022 appropriation, the judicial branch had 109 employees who were below 70% of market. So 109 employees doesn't sound like much, but the judicial branch has much fewer employees than the executive branch. So that actually makes up 40% of our workforce, not counting judges. With the 2022 appropriation, all employees were moved to 70% or above, but there were still 169 employees below the minimum of market. With the 2023 appropriation, as I said, all employees have been moved to slightly above market minimum. So right now, our lowest employee is sitting at 81.5%. Currently, we have 231 employees who are below 90% of market. So these are just some numbers that we were able to pull based on that classification structure. It is something that we need to address. And essentially, the judicial branch employees should not be paid at a lower percentage of market than their counterparts in the executive branch. And as a result of that, what you will be seeing in our budget request coming in December is a request to bring our employees up to a similar level of market as the executive branch employees. So what that will look like is a $5.4 million request to bring in those employees up to 94% of market. And Mr. Chairman, I don't know that I have anything else to add, but I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have for me.
Rick Plumstead, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman. Yeah, Ms. Butler, I think when we get to the details of that later on in December or January, it would be helpful if we could get a breakdown by just job classification, just get a sense for if you're a law clerk to this district court judge, what do you start at? What's your top salary? That kind of detail would be, I would find helpful.
Well, and to follow up on that, I'm curious because I presume that you worked with A&I to move into the Hay structure or something similar to it. But what I'm curious about is in that Hay structure, what did you look at? Did you look at surrounding states? You did like a national, and you know, in terms of jobs classification, because my guess is there's a significant differences in different parts of, you know, back east, West Coast that probably are not, so, you know, valid comparisons to, and if you're using national numbers versus regional numbers, it might make it, I'm curious what those numbers would be so that we can, in fact, I was planning to talk with Trish earlier this week, so we could see what actual numbers you used, what you came up with, and where those numbers come from, and if we want to ask for another type of comparison by regional states or that type of thing, that we'll have time to do it. So just.
Mr. Chairman, just to give you a little bit of background on the process that we went through for the classification structure, those two employees that I mentioned before, they became certified in the Hay methodology. So they are certified similar to the HRD folks who do the calculate or the classification. Once those initial classifications were made, our team worked with HRD to collaborate and make sure that our positions were in line with what we would think. We're using the pay tables of the executive branch. So the pay numbers are the same. And so we've just graded those in accordance with the way that the executive branch does and used the pay ranges that the executive branch uses.
So according to that, then we just got a heck of a deal for the last 5 or 10 years when you guys didn't want to come into the Hay study.
Mr. Chairman, no comment.
Okay. Any questions for Alyssa? Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just wondering if you could offer some clarification. I think you had mentioned an 8% average increase. And that is a little bit different from the memo that we have that calls out a 13.2% increase. And just, to clarify the difference there. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Sherwood, that 13.2% increase is to those employees who actually received a raise. So it's not overall. So there were a number of employees within our branch who didn't actually receive a raise because they are above 81.5% of market. So you'll see those numbers again in that handout that we provided to you. After the 2022 raise, we were looking at 62, well, more than 62. I don't do numbers, but a number of employees who didn't actually receive the raise because they were above that 81.5% of market.
Okay, further questions? All right, thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, anything else on this particular subject? Anything else? So next on the agenda, Don, is?
Mr. Chairman, the next item is item number 8, the reorganization of the Department of ETS or Enterprise Technology Services.
So the chief doesn't have to move. Okay, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, we're here today to provide an update on the task force work on the reorganization of the Department of Enterprise Technology Services. We have obviously Director Bach was heavily involved in that, as was Director Sheehan. We also have, we went out, and what we did, Mr. Chairman, is we went back out and we created a task force on the executive staff to work to look at this. And we went about, we provided you should have in your packet, we provided a slide deck to go through this that summarizes what we did there. So I have, if you go to page 4, you have our task force members. So we wanted to make sure we had a broad group of stakeholders across the enterprise. I was there, Director Sheehan, Director Bach. We also asked Director Cooley to participate, and who was an active participant. Then outside of existing state government, we also went out to Andrea Byrne, agreed to serve, who's was the CIO for the Secretary of State's office in the past. And Jackie Childress, who's also a chief financial officer for ETS in the past. So she had some history there. Both of those folks, I believe, are now working in the private sector. Went to Professor Smith, Ron Smith, who's a senior associate dean of the University College of Business, to talk about, we wanted some organizational expertise. We also have, who also is with us today, John Wood, who is the chief information officer for Central Wyoming College, representing again another stakeholder who is a participant and also a stakeholder in some of the functions that ETS does. We went out, and the first thing we did is we conducted a number of listening sessions. My recollection was somewhere a dozen to 15 listening sessions that we conduct with ETS employees across the enterprise. We tried to give every employee at ETS an opportunity to participate in at least one of the listening sessions. Most of those were done online, and I thought we had great participation. We did it in smaller groups to make sure, and so these folks are with their peers, and I thought we got some very good feedback from those. Then we also went out and did listening sessions for, we had, I think, six listening sections to invite all agency directors to participate. We wanted to make sure we had a broad participation by our directors. And so those we had 6, and we had pretty good participation from directors. Certainly not all agencies were represented, but we did have most took an advantage to participate in at least one. You go to page 7, you'll see some of the from the agency listening sessions we kind of went, what were some of the positives that we found and what were some areas of improvement that we had. And these are some of the ones that we found out, and I think we dispelled in some respects some misinformation that had gone on about the services that ETS provides. What we found out pretty much uniformly was customer service was a real standout in all listening sessions. That was some things that I think that JAC and others in the past may have heard differently, but I don't remember a director having much to say but high praise for the help desk, for service delivery and field services staff, extremely helpful if day-to-day issues. They're also pleased if they had direct bill staff. We still have a few direct bill folks where folks are housed in agencies, but their services are directly billed back to the agency from ETS. Most of those folks were very, very pleased with that. Most agencies were very, very complimentary of Director Sheehan and for his support and willingness to help. And also they had on where we've had some cyber security issues, they thought that the CARES team, the cyber assistance response effort team, worked really great. You also see then some areas where directors thought or believed that they identified some areas that they thought the ETS can improve. Most agencies agreed that they should not be responsible for cybersecurity. Cybersecurity, as we all know, continues to increase. It changes a lot, and it's something that just is going to be continuing to be a problem. And I think just an increasing problem for the state to maintain the integrity of its data and who's on its system and who's using its data and has the access for it. We also, one of the other things that we came across is, and I know Director Sheehan and I have talked about this numerous times, is sometimes there's some frustration with ETS evaluating and improving small IT purchases. And I know this is something Director Sheehan has talked about in the past, providing a storefront where you can get peripherals, thumb drives, things like that that are pre-approved and have so that we're not just putting anything into our system. Once we're behind the firewall, it's very difficult to provide cybersecurity. One of the things we have on this side of the agency, instead of moving over from the legislative, this side is monthly, we're doing cybersecurity trainings. They come on and we're doing cybersecurity trainings on a monthly basis. They show up in my inbox and they remind me if I haven't taken them on time. But I actually go through and talk about that. And they always consistently make the message that the first link in the cybersecurity chain is the user, the operator behind there, who's providing access. And everything from passwords to, making sure of, phishing, identifying phishing attempts, and also, just trying to keep control of what's in and what has access to the system that gets behind the firewall. I think one of the other things is there's and probably this is the area where there's the most frustration, are contract delays and when we have IT contracts. And those just become a problem in large part. I believe that the task force came to the conclusion that the reason that is a problem is they're just undermanned. There's not enough people to, whether it's implementing Salesforce or whether it's implementing a larger system, there's just not enough people to direct that work and to be that, for lack of a better word, you understand on a JC, an owner's rep, to make sure that what you're getting and what the contractor promised and what the package promised is actually delivered and actually works when it gets to the agency. So I think that's one of the issues. We also have some great examples where when it works extremely well. I'd encourage any of you, if you have the chance, she's very, very proud of it, to talk to Director Henson at the Department of Revenue, who they just finally have implemented the long-awaited and multiple attempts. This last attempt has been seems to be a resounding success. The governor and I went out there, I think last week or the week before, and we did a tour, met with the folks out there, and those folks are so excited about the new system they have at the liquor warehouse. They are smiling. I know that there's been a tremendous amount of frustration. That's about 6 years or so in the process with a few false starts on that. But what has happened out there is remarkable. And Brenda will give all the credit in the world to her who was assigned her project manager from ETS, who shepherded that thing from beginning to end, was there every step of the way, and has just been invaluable. And she'll give all kinds of credit to that project manager for making that complete. And I think, and that's not the only one. So when we do it and we do it right, it works really, really well. The problem is that we're not always able to do it right. And one of those things is that the fact that who's responsible and where the responsibility for IT begins and ends from ETS into the agency is a real fuzzy line. And I think I will just stop there and let Director Sheehan add anything he would like to add at this point.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, TR Sheehan, Interim Director for ETS. I think the chief did a really good job there explaining that. What we have found, just to kind of reiterate on IT projects, having that project manager is critical, just like a construction project, ensuring that what's being delivered, what's being tracked is happening. And that's something we are lacking on many of our IT projects across the state that can delay things, add to cost, or cause some failures down the road. So that's just one point I'd like to reiterate, that we need these project managers on our IT projects.
I think one of the things that, Mr. Chairman, one of the additional background of that, when ETS was consolidated, I think there was 130 some positions. Is that right? That were given up, that went away in the consolidation. And I think one of the conclusions or one of the recommendations you'll see in a bit is that the task force came to is that it was probably overcut particularly in that area. And then one of the other areas of improvement is TRP, the Technology Replacement Program. We're going through that in our side of the budget hearings. You'll hear all that. But as we go through, I think there's a lot of reasons that ETS ought to be responsible to just implement the TRP And if TR has anything he'd like to add, I'll let him do that.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So TR, when you mentioned the number of these projects that it's good to have an advisory position or design. Can you just share with us, give us an idea at any one time around the state, how many of those we have going on in your ability currently to staff that type of oversight?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, at any given time, there's probably, a rough guesstimate, 24 projects, IT projects going on between the agencies. There's usually something going on somewhere, from small projects to large projects. Even at the same time, multiple RFPs are going on right now. I'm working very closely with Director Bach and causing some heartache, I think, with a couple of her folks, because we're trying to slow down the process to make sure we do it the best way we can going forward. Currently on staff, I only have 2 or 3 project managers, and they're in an ISF format, a build back format. And so it happened to work out for Director Henson, to where she had the funding for her project to pay for the project manager. In talking with some of the committee members on the task force and some of the agency directors, I think we'd like to see that potentially as a generally funded option, so they're available. That's sort of the short scoop of where we're at there.
Follow up, I could, TR. So were you hiring in consultants for that, or were they on staff? So help me.
We were fortunate enough to have a couple individuals within ETS who have the project management experience or training or background, so we were able to leverage their expertise. Director Henson did go out for RFP for her project, and that's where we were able to kind of work something out. It would have ended up costing a little more than 2 times what we pay in FPE to perform that same service had we gone out to a contractor.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Sheehan. First of all, thanks for hanging in there. And to all the ETS employees who are hanging in there. I know there's been some tumultuous times, and it's, most people just want to show up to work and do the work, and appreciate you hanging in there. I've got clarification. Maybe it's you, or maybe it's Chief of Staff Perkins, but on page 7 of the handout or the PowerPoint, right in the middle, I've got a couple of things I just want briefly clarified. Centralized enterprise functions work well when followed by agencies. What help me understand that sentence? I'm not sure what it's saying.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Senator Kinski, I think what that gets to is there is an occasion where, and it's not uncommon, where you have centralized IT in other states. It's a pretty common theme is, the agencies know their mission well, and some agencies at times may disagree with what central IT or enterprise IT can provide for them. And so I think it's ensuring we have better communication from ETS out to the agencies, that what we are recommending will be a good fit for them. And so I think that's the biggest, it's a communication challenge more than anything else.
Okay, follow up.
Go ahead.
Page 8, left-hand column, second from the bottom bullet. Program management is lacking. I assume that's not a computer program. Are they talking about the ETS program, or are they talking about a particular type of program within the agency? Management is lacking. What's that one?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Kinsey, I believe that's referring to project management.
Project management. Okay. And then on page 8, again, on the right-hand side, ETS is a large collection of single point failures. I don't know what that one's a complete mystery to me.
Senator Kinsey, I refer to that often as we are a defense in depth of one. And what that really means is we have one person and not a backup for that person. And so that creates several challenges. One, there may be ownership of a particular system or project, and it's one person. So if they go on vacation, they're sick, they want to go to a family function, it's hard for them to walk away from work and know that things are going to be okay. And so that ties into also succession planning and that sort of thing. Is when we lose that person, it's a pretty significant setback to the agency to skill somebody up to step in. And so while we talk we're resource challenge, having a second or a third person in there to be able to backfill, back up, assist, et cetera, is something we're missing within the agency.
Thank you. That's helpful. Follow on page 8. Towards the bottom on the right-hand column, OCIO versus ETS, separation of duties is needed. So that's the Office of the Chief Information Officer versus ETS. Why would those duties need to be separated? I would think the CIO would be over ETS.
Senator Kinsey, that is correct. I think where there's some misinterpretation is, often the Office of the CIO is working on policies and standards. And then ETS proper is the service providing organization. They're the ones who are actually out there, providing storage, provisioning storage, giving them virtual machines, fixing, desktops. And so I think sometimes there's sort of a confusion of, a blurring of the lines, so to speak. And so I try to be cautious of, what is CIO proper duties versus what is ETS proper duties.
Okay. Follow on page 9. Second to the last sentence. Agencies with proprietary or highly specialized IT systems likely will need dedicated personnel. I understand that. I just couldn't find it in the draft bill. Is that a concept that's made its way into the draft bill or not?
Mr. Chairman, no, I don't think you'll find that in the draft bill. I think that's just a question of staffing and where that staffing is. If the classic examples are the MMIS in health and the wings that we've got. Those are large systems, and I think for the most part, those people have, and those are the exceptions also, where those people are actually employed in the agencies and have and so that expertise with those particular proprietary systems are remain in the agencies. But for the most part, all other IT services and project manager are in ETS, and I'll let TR amplify.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Kinsey, I think a really good example is unemployment insurance at DWS. That is a highly specialized federal program, and those staff members need to really focus on the regulatory and compliance aspects of what that program means. There are enterprise options with some of these, same thing with health and game and fish and YDOT. We can leverage some shared services, but there are some specialties that some agencies do need.
So, Mr. Chairman, if I understood Chief of Staff Perkins, effectively, this is already true that agencies with proprietary, highly specialized IT systems do have dedicated personnel within their agencies. They're not looking to ETS for that highly specialized support.
For the highly specialized support, no. Where I believe ETS can be of service, and then for the greater good of the enterprise is where we can and should leverage those shared services. So if we have an agency who's going to provision in AWS or Salesforce or Google Cloud, for example, we should be leveraging enterprise contracts and that sort of thing. So their big buying power will then trickle down to our smaller agencies for those savings.
Okay, and then just last one on page 10, last line. This is a human resources or development question. ETS employees should have a career path that does not require changing or diverting them from their area of expertise. And then help me understand that one a little bit.
Senator Kinsey, I think the easiest way to explain that is I believe ETS probably needs to have a classification study performed on the agency. We may need to expand what I would call line staff classifications. We have some highly talented technicians, and the only way for them to move up in the organization or to make more money is to move into a supervisory position. And they may not be the best supervisor, but they're a phenomenal technician. So let's keep them where they're specialized, where they perform well, and find a way to, compensate them appropriately.
Gotcha. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Sheehan, Mr. Perkins.
And so with that, there's no reason to necessarily go through the page of this. There's certainly willing to answer any questions that belong. Let me turn that back on. Mr. Chairman, the long and the short of it is that as we came through this, the biggest recommendation is that ETS should not be consolidated into ANI. And that was a consensus determination of the task force. And there were some director, you know, if I go ahead and refer to Director Bach and Director Sessions, both came in with the idea at the beginning that it should be. And as we went through the listening sessions, we did our work as we met as our working group, both of them came to change their opinion of that and felt and agree with that consensus position that it should not be consolidated at this time. I mean, there may be reasons to do consolidations across state government in the future, but that's a reorganization and cabinet issue, not an agency functioning issue. And to single out ETS at this time to do that just seemed would be probably do more harm than good. So with that, I mean, we have these recommendations. We can go through that. I know you guys have a busy day. I just work downstairs, so we can always talk about this. The Director Sheehan just works down the street, and Director Block just works across here. So maybe we'll just conclude it there. That's the big drop, is that there's things that we do really well. There's some things we need to do better, and there's some things we probably need to do. I would commend to you on our draft. This was a draft. We went out looking at the ETS statute. We thought it was a little bit long and involved. It's also apparent that particularly in the neighborhood of cybersecurity, but IT is changing dramatically. And so I think that we went back out. This is pretty much plagiarized from Vermont, who just recently did a significant reorganization of its statewide, its enterprise IT group agency there. And so this is plagiarized freely from there with some adaptation, try and fold it into there. But ultimately, this would be somewhat of a simplification and probably a bit broader empowerment of ETS to do certain things on behalf of the enterprise. I think that's the main gist. Well, we've got that. That's my poor attempt to give you an LSO draft. And I think when I forwarded that, I forwarded the PDF and the Word version to LSO so that they don't have to retype it if they want to do it.
And so,
Mr. Co-Chair.
what, go ahead.
There's only a few pages here, but I know there's hours and hours and hours of work by a lot of people, and we've circled around multiple times on ETS. This is good work. Thank you.
So the question is, would you like this to be a JAC bill this coming session? And if so, we want to put this on our calendar in December to kind of walk through and have it presented to us at some point in time, and so that we can work the bill.
Mr. Chairman, obviously that's, you guys, this is a budget session. And so you guys have full plates. If not, then I think you could probably defer to the interim. But if you want to work on it, we're certainly at your disposal to give you whatever support and participate however you would like us.
Well, in the event that only 20 bills get 40 votes, we might need something to do. Go ahead.
But Mr. Co-Chair.
Mr. Chairman, so my concern was as we, a year or so ago, as we started this conversation on what and how to approach ETS, we had a couple of bills on trying to bring and strengthen the statutes up and solidify what our expectations for this agency is. We kind of set that aside and we left all of that in limbo. And I just don't think we leave the agency in a good spot and do it any favors by postponing. And I would encourage us to at least start diving into that and make it look, because I just don't think it's statutorily it's set real great.
I guess the contrary view might be maybe the less we do to help them, the better off they are.
Maybe.
It looks like they're doing good work, and I think another year of continuing down this path and figuring out, the best approaches and doing as much as they can administratively, and they can come back to us if there's something that absolutely has to be in statute so they can move forward. but it looks like they're making great progress now. I'm kind of inclined to leave it alone.
Go ahead.
Mr.
Chief?
Chairman, I think that the one, if there was an element, if you wanted to not take the whole enchilada, so to speak, at once, I think the one thing that might be helpful is there is some provisions in the back with respect to the Information Technology Authorization Committee. And this goes to that discussion about the difference between ETS and the OCIO. And the intent of this is to establish policy with respect to IT in the statewide enterprise. And I'll just give you an example. We've been having some discussion about AI. The state of Wyoming is a little bit behind on use of AI at this point, behind what some of our states are doing. We're having discussions with various vendors and other people who would like to come and have various ways that they think AI can help the state. And that's just an example of as providing this ability for the OCIO, the Office of the Chief Information Officer, to do some things. And TR has attended some national meetings on this with other OCIOs, and maybe he would have an opinion about that as well.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I think the biggest recommendation here is formalizing proper IT governance in the state and what those expectations are and who those members should be. And part of it is, I believe, the legislative branch should have some visibility into what some of that is by some representation, and just setting some ground rules on how projects are reviewed, vetted, and move forward. And in the event where we do see a project having some struggles, how we can leverage governance to rein that back in. So that's the biggest, I think, piece of what is suggested on page 5 out of that proposed 2907 is let's get good governance.
So we'd be happy to review it if you want to do a limited bill that addresses that particular concept, if that facilitates your operations through the next budget cycle or the next session, I should say. And if you limit to that, that's a simple bill. It should be very simple to kick out and to review, kick out, and get. And if we get it through the House, then it might have a little bit better chance in the Senate. So feel free to do that if that's your preference. So Don, would you make sure that LSO works on, checks up the chief's typing and punctuation?
Mr. Chairman, I might have a few clarifying questions.
Sure.
Tamara Revley, LSO staff. I want to be clear in the committee's request. You're directing LSO to draft a bill based on the language provided as the handout, the statutory request, but limited only to the Information Technology Authorization Committee.
And anything else the chief wants in there? Or
And
not?
anything else the chief wants?
Okay.
Well,
Let's go.
we'll make sure TR is included in that. I'll do what TR tells me.
And Mr. Chairman, there are some legislative determinations that need to be made that have been left off regarding the scope of state government and the judiciary branch and the legislative branch and the executive branch, and then staffing of the committee and other logistical details and other policy questions. Would there be a member of the JAC or a working group or any direction that I should go to for that, or simply work with the
I would
governor's
go-
office?
I would go through the chief first, but then you could forward it to the co-chairs when you have a working draft.
Thank
Go ahead,
you.
Representative.
And Mr. Chairman, as I've got ETS, I'd like to be on the distribution list
Sure.
for that. I did have a question for clarification. Some of the proposed language proposed creating a state chief information security officer, a cybersecurity person. I didn't know if we wanted to create that in this bill draft or if the agency wanted to take it more slowly.
Well, we can cross that bridge as you're drafting. Okay, anything else? Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This question would either be for Chief Perkins or for Kevin. In the task force recommendations, it suggests putting the budget in all 400 series. Is that how it will be developed this year to get things started, or what's coming forward based on that recommendation?
No, it's not currently in that fashion. The state budget department, along with TR, we spearheaded this so that we can get this all in one place. And in the past, you've heard me say that we got things floating around in 900, we got things floating around in 200 series. I think it's a good thing to do. Let's get it all in one place so we can be transparent with it.
And so in terms of bill structure, that would be
I
fairly
think
simple,
that
isn't it?
we can just do that upon the recommendation of the chief of staff,
Okay.
and we can just do that without having to write up a bunch of narratives in the bill.
Mr. Chairman, I mean, at this point, I mean, as we've gone through our budget hearings, I mean, we do kind of what you do. We look at the TRP, the TRP is identified in each agency. We look for we generally look, and with almost no exceptions, it's got approval numbers that have gone through ETS already. So we're kind of doing that. Ultimately, I think this, and I can visit with TR and see if we want to do that a little bit differently, but I think in this budget, and unless you want it differently, I don't know that we'll change it from what we've got so far. But if you want to see it differently, I think you can let us know.
Well, we're pretty far down the road. I don't want to make it more complicated for anybody. Go ahead. Kevin.
Mr. Chairman, I think that's a positive move forward. I mean, we are a long way along the path now. It would be almost overly complicated to accomplish that, but we're committed to the idea that we get the transactions in the 400 series in a fashion where it's transparent and it's funded properly. You know, the state budget department has an interest to make sure that we capture the right funding on everything as well, which we will collaborate and get accomplished just at the direction. So I believe that over the supplemental, we can work out the details. And when we submit the 27-28 budget to you, you'll see something different.
Okay, great. Thank you. Any other further questions? Any public comment on that particular issue? Or anything else we've talked about today? Almost on time. All right. Thank you very much. Don?
Mr. Chairman, with your permission, I might add that last conversation to a potential query for the state auditor's office. We're not taking any position on this, but I know that they have historically had significant concerns about changes to their chart of accounts, and which is what they're basically suggesting here, moving 240, 241, 242, 292 into the 400 series. SAO may wish to opine on this, and I might just give you with your permission.
That's fine, although I don't think anything, well, that's.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, the intent would be exactly the way Dawn said it. We would be working through the interim, and we would be working with ETS, and certainly SAO has a stake in that conversation. And we've been moving the ball already with SAO and their stuff, and as well as an inventory. So we're not at ground zero. We're well along the way, expected in 27-28 with the SAO's approval.
Okay, anything else? All right, next on the agenda, we've got State Treasurer's Office. Who's filing in? Welcome, Kurt. Good to see you.
Good to see all of you guys. It's been way too long.
Go ahead.
Okay, so I think you guys wanted me to talk about, I think ESG, if I recall what was on the agenda. And you should all have a handout there that has the ESG policy of the investment policy. So essentially that's what we're operating on. And we actually had a circumstance that allowed us to just see how it actually worked, and it worked fine. It was myself, the governor, and the auditor voted for a manager, and that the material terms needed a little bit of work. So it came back to our office, and we looked at the the language that came back with it, and determined that we needed to have a conversation with KKR. We've had those conversations, and they essentially agreed with us that in that case that coal can be removed, and we're in the process of getting that documented. So it worked exactly the way we wanted it to work, and there's been some consternation, I think, with some of the folks that wanted us to not move that forward at all. But in reality, the policy actually works to the standpoint that you don't have to go back through the whole process, and you can have a conversation and see if you can come to a meeting of minds without having to go through the back through the IFC, back through the SLIB board. And so we should be able to get the state's money invested a lot earlier had we not had the policy. So it was pretty clear in what we needed to do. We did it, and I guess the way I look at it, those guys saw what they could lose and felt that they could take coal out of that and not necessarily lose face because they were going to gain investment returns.
Okay, any questions for Kurt on that particular issue? On the new policy? Go
Mr.
ahead.
Chairman, oh, thank you. Mr. Treasurer, good afternoon.
Yes, yeah, good afternoon.
I wanted to make sure I heard you so what we've got in front of us, and I don't see the date on it. I move it up here. Hang on. Yes, on this memorandum from you dated October 10th, 2023, section 3.5. If I got the right one?
Yes.
Okay, and this is the ESG policy that was voted on and approved by the SLIB board at 2 meetings ago, I think it was. I was watching.
No,
that.
it was
Last meeting?
No, that what was voted on 2 weeks ago was a manager. And that this has been in for quite some time here. Let's see, what's
August?
At the August meeting.
August,
Yeah.
yeah, okay, sorry.
Yeah.
Okay, and just a question. So far, as far from the investment team, have you gotten, any negative feedback? Does this policy, as it's presented, as it was voted on by the SLIB board, working okay for your investment folks and working?
Well, I guess that negative feed we got back was specifically, I think, from the.
Kurt, can you talk into the mic?
Okay, the negative feedback was from one of the members that voted to have it reconsidered. And myself, the governor, and the auditor voted not to reconsider the motion. And what that does is like shoves it back to our office so we can implement the ESG policy.
And just follow up that. That's great. But I'm asked now, since then, with your money management people, the folks and not the SLIB board, the folks that are actually working with this day to day, working all right?
We're working all right. We haven't had any blowback from the other managers that we have, and this is a perspective process because it's on based from August 3rd on. As we put on managers, then we can have the conversation with them when we get into the contract. This particular provision slipped through that process and didn't get changed. And I guess that I'll say that's on me because I wasn't babysitting it through the process. We thought everything was just Jake and running through just fine. And with a little more examination, we found out that, well, we're going to have to go back and revisit that. Revisited it, got the basically what we wanted to do was to take coal out because that could possibly interfere or look at, as I'll look in here, or perhaps have a loss of the state's revenue in general. So that's where we were looking at. That was the phrase that we hung our hat on to make sure that we could have the conversation with the manager.
Just one more follow-up, just so majority of the slip votes for it. Your money managers are not having an issue in a negative way. Everyone seems to be on board with this and it's working correctly. Would that be a fair characterization of how things are going with regard to ESG policy at the State Treasurer's Office?
Yes, I would say that would be a fair characterization of it.
That's all I need, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much.
Yes, Mr. Vice Chair.
Thank you. Treasurer Myers, so walk me through that process of when the treasurer then shall, in that second paragraph where the treasurer shall respond to investment partner. Is that when your staff finds that there's an ESG concern, or does the investment committee, you run that by the investment committee that you identified this problem and have a consultation there before you have that conversation, or what's the protocol there?
Well, in this particular case, we did not run it by the investment committee. I think it was pretty apparent at the SLID board that there was some concern from the testimony and reaction of some of the other members. And when I looked at it and cast my vote, I said that the quickest way to resolve this issue is to have the treasurer's office come back in and address it. And so I looked at the authorization within the ESG policy statement and felt that it was there. So we moved forward on it and addressed it.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Treasurer, thank you. I just want to understand how this policy works as implemented. Let's imagine that one of our major investment advisors or custodians we deal with, say JP Morgan Chase, comes out with a very strong, what they call green policy. Does this investment policy now authorize you to just, if you so decide, to pull all of our investments away from JP Morgan Chase?
Well, JP Morgan Chase is primarily our custodial bank. And that in that regard, that's a relationship that if you look at all the other potential custodial banks that we could do business with, they essentially have the same ESG policies. And so it would be at this point in time, I think, impossible to find any bank that in the United States or the world that didn't have some of those policies. But it's interesting, and I'll diverge a little bit about what that policy means. I think that different organizations that have signed on to some of these different things, whether they're United Nations or Paris Accords or anything else, or carbon free by a certain date. We actually did a deal with one of those major New York banks. And that was a deal where we bought over 450 miles of gathering systems in the Powder River Basin. And they were, I think, I would call them one of probably the primary sponsor of that major bank. And so even though they had that, the opportunity to make a great deal of profit, I think was more a motivation to them than looking at the language that they signed on to as far as supporting an ESG standard. So that particular instance, in a few months, we basically had a 1.8 multiplier on our the original money that was under investment. So it's, so essentially that was about an 80% return in a few months. So as we move through this process, and I guess I look back historically when most of these banks signed on to the ESG protocols about limiting their exposure to minerals, we were looking at $30-35 a barrel oil. And there wasn't a lot of money in the oil patch or the gas patch, and I think that as markets change, that there's a potential to do some investing. And if you look at the fine print in that language that was there, it was only a restriction of solely investing in coal projects. And so I'll give you an example of a project that's up in Vancouver, Canada. And it's a coal port. It's a port up there that, and this particular company ships met coal and thermal coal, and it also ships potash. So because potash is in the mix, that would not preclude any of these companies with that particular ESG standard from making a contribution or an investment in that particular business. So, or it's like railroad cars, which KKR does. I think they've got 3,000 railroad cars. And the railroad cars ship coal, but they can ship grain. So it doesn't preclude them from making an investment in railroad cars. So even though this language in material terms may say coal, it's always from what we've seen at this point in time, it's modified by saying solely, or primarily. So it allows those companies to go ahead and invest in a multi-purpose, facility that has coal in it, or oil or natural gas from that standpoint. Does that help, Representative?
Mr. Chairman, thank you, Mr. Treasurer.
Okay, thank you.
So Treasurer Meyer, I'm trying to get a little comfort here on my last question, and it may be that I don't understand the process well, but yet when I ask you if you could, if you intervene on this ESG effort when it's identified, if you have to go in front of the investment committee or anything before you do that, and you guys cumulatively have said, no, you don't. So my question is, if you find an investment partner that you feel is out, can you then terminate or do anything that would move our investments that was approved by the investment committee away from that partner without their approval?
Okay, let me go through how, if you were going to terminate an investment partner or go through the process. First, it has to be discovered, that they are acting in a non-pecuniary manner. And so that's the first hurdle. And what you would do at that point in time, you would make a determination that if they are, then because there's potential detrimental to our highest risk adjusted returns or to the returns of the state. So there's a few hurdles that you get in there to look at that. And then, looking at this is that the first thing you do is you have a conversation. You don't shoot and ask questions later. So you have a conversation and see if you can talk to them, tell them what your concerns are. They tell you what their concerns are, and see whether you can come to, terms that everybody agrees on, which we were able to do in this one circumstance. So, that's the first thing that you do. Then the next thing you do is that, if they are a public company, then you take it to the board process and utilize your proxy votes to help identify the program, what you consider a problem, and try to convince the board members that it's in their best interest, as far as the profitability of the company and the shareholders, that it's in their best interest to follow the direction that you're trying to lead them. If that doesn't work, then you look at, okay, you say to yourself, are there any alternatives? And back to the point of the good representative from the Rock Springs area, in the areas of our custodial banks, there are no alternatives. So you try to work with the people that are going to give you the best service in those cases, and you go on about your business. Hi, Don. Don's going to jump in here, and so she can jump in. And
is my question making sense? I just want to, at the end of the day, if the stars align and we don't like anything, do you have the authority then to terminate that agreement?
No. Well, what happens is that you have the authority to defund them and the authority to terminate the agreement or the contract lies with the select board.
Mr. Chairman, Don Williams, Deputy State Treasurer, that's exactly right. So but that doesn't change. That's something we can do now.
Yes.
If a manager is not meeting the needs of the state, if they're not meeting the agreed terms, we can defund them. And as the treasurer said, that a termination of a manager does still have to go in front of the select board. So that's no different than we already have it. And I wanted to add too, that we, in response to this, the creation of this new ESG policy within the investment policy statement, our office has a draft plan of a policy that, how we're going to handle it internally. It's with our Bill Pilger, who's our general counsel, and he's reviewing that. And then we'll have that because we wanted to adopt a procedure for how Bill Pilger, he's our general counsel. And so he has that on his desk for review right now within our office. And so then once he thinks it's appropriate, then we'll publish that's how we proceed.
And there are times when we defund managers, they may be meeting their stated goals and things, but we have an alternative that's better. And we've done that in the case of the BlackRock International dollars that we had, was somewhere around 85 million there. Well, we've been running a program, a quantitative program in the office for over a year, testing it. And we were essentially, the internal team was blowing the socks off of BlackRock in that particular category of investment in asset class. So we basically moved that money back in the house. We still have BlackRock in private equity, and but the international part, I think most, if not all, that money has been transferred back into internal management.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Nephi Cole. I'm the Director of Government Relations and State Affairs for the National Shooting Sports Foundation, the Firearms Trade Association of America. Just wanted to commend the Treasurer's Office on the excellent job they've done addressing this issue and all the hard work they put into it. It's a fantastic group of people and they're doing a really good job. I want to thank the legislature for the attention that this committee, members of the legislature, continue to give to this issue, and just share with you a couple of points. ESG funds lost 0.85% of their total value over the last 2 years as compared to 0.02% of all general funds. And that's according to an article that came out in the last several days from Bloomberg and Morningstar. And I'll get to a point here, I promise. But investors pulled over $280 billion from ESG stocks since their high in 2021. And Morningstar said that the reason for this, and I quote, "American investors no longer find them appealing due to the increased scrutiny. Republican politicians have accused the funds of boycotting certain industries." Larry Fink had some things to say about that, who's from BlackRock, and I want you to know why we appreciate so much your willingness to have this conversation. The reason that people are stopping with this discrimination against legitimate industries is because you're having this conversation. And if you weren't willing to come and have this conversation and talk about your policies, things wouldn't be changing on the investment side. I do want to quickly say we do recognize still that there's a difference between the investment banking side and the consumer banking side, and encourage you to please continue to look at opportunities for the state to put its money where its policies are, and to express what you believe to be the right approach through who you do business with. And with that, I just want to again thank you from our industry for your willingness to entertain this conversation, because it's not an easy one.
Thanks, Steve. And you've been really, you've attended all of these and provided a lot of thought and guidance for us. We appreciate that. On this last thing on in-state banks and banking within the state, when you suggest or request that we try to address the state's use of these banks within the state, local banks, I'll call them, on state funds, are you including in there like county and municipal funds, or are you just talking solely state of Wyoming dollars?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, I think you could do it either way. We've seen legislation in Utah, which covers all of the different municipalities in Utah, and they have this law that we talk about related to consumer. Montana, I believe the law that was passed in Montana is only explicit to state funds and the banks the state of Montana would choose to use. Again, that said, we think that the proper approach and probably a better approach than maybe we would have considered, like, say, 3 years ago, is just to require disclosure and then to give the state the authority to then consider inappropriate discrimination in deciding where they'll do business. And again, recognizing the state needs to have the flexibility sometimes to choose a larger bank that may still have discriminatory policies just because somebody else may not be able to handle the banking need. But we think that that disclosure and choice, we think that that's an appropriate market-based approach and probably a better approach than one we would have, say, recommended 2 years ago.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Other questions? Thank you for your testimony. Any other public comment? Closed public comment. It is now 3 o'clock. So we'll take a 10-minute break and be back for a performance compensation presentation. Thank you. Back. But not sorry. Grant, please proceed.
Mr. Chairman, I'm David Swindell, the Executive Director of the Wyoming Retirement System. Sorry. Okay. And I'm assisted here by Sam Masudi, our Chief Investment Officer. I believe we have my board chairman, Tom Chapman, on the Zoom. Aaron, do we have him? And
That sounds like Tom.
so he was going to lead off our remarks if he's prepared to do that. It looks like he is.
Good afternoon, Tom.
Mr. Chair, thank you for having me. Members of the committee, my name is Tom Chapman. I am Chair of the Wyoming Retirement System. In the midst of our first big storm that's coming here through Jackson, which we're supposed to get a couple feet, I will make my remarks brief. Particularly given the fact that I felt like we just had this discussion 2 months ago here in Jackson. I will not go through the success that the investment program has produced as much as I would like to. So this is taking restraint. But I do want to mention that, frankly, we are extremely grateful from your support. Frankly, you all have provided the tools that have now made the Wyoming retirement system one of the best investment programs in the country. And I think it's through your trust in us, through these numerous testimonies, et cetera, that have really paid off. The board is extremely confident in the accuracy and the transparency of our performance compensation and our benchmarks. I think we went through it last time, but really this has been supported through a very robust verification process. One of the things that really has improved in our board is we now have, I think, quite a few investment professionals on our board. So it's been really helpful as we've been going through performance comp and that verification. I would also talk about the various independent parties such as Makita, Northern Trust, and the IFC that all review of our calculations. We also have an internal audit that conducts the audits as well. And I'd also note that, from the Investment Funds Committee, the IFC, there has never been a comment or question regarding both the performance comp and the benchmarks. So I think what's happened is since our last discussion, we had our board meeting about a month ago. We feel that, frankly, sort of it's of spending. Excuse me. Sorry about that. We feel that spending $250,000 a year, or I should say our total cost of $250,000, and frankly, the concern about diverting some staff in terms of trying to prepare these things is going to be challenging. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is that the board is sort of concerned about the need for doing this, given all of the various checks and balances and things that we have. So I will stop at that so I can mute the barking. I guess Dave can kind of walk through a little bit more about the process or if there are any questions, but we're just concerned with, frankly, the use of the resources and frankly, the amount of money that'll cost. And frankly, we're not really sure where it's going to really get us anywhere more than where we are today. So thank you.
Okay, questions for Tom? Anybody? Representative Steph.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Chapman. So my question is, what procedures do you already have in place, or what would you suggest to make sure that if an investment manager is selecting a benchmark, that the portfolio is actually the true portfolio for that risk profile? By that, I mean, if someone says, your benchmark is a 10-year treasury, well, that's simple enough. But how do you verify, or what's a good way to verify that whoever's investing the money doesn't also game it so that, for example, you buy on margin or you buy some derivative that gooses the return a little bit so that the risk profile is actually different than what they say the benchmark is. Do you have any recommendations for how we address that problem, if that problem exists?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, Representative Sith, thank you for the question. You know, what I'll do is I will pass that probably over to Sam Masudi for him to answer that probably in better detail. So why don't you go ahead, Sam?
Right. So, Mr. Chairman, Representative Stiff, so it's important to differentiate between a manager benchmark versus our portfolio benchmark. So for instance, for our equity asset class, we have a benchmark of Russell 3000, which is pretty much all the major 3,000 largest US stocks. If we invest with a tech manager, for instance, we might benchmark them against a tech benchmark, but that doesn't change the WRS benchmark. It's based on the Russell 3000. And several times every year, we'll look at every manager and make sure that they're investing according to their investment restrictions. So that's one way we check it. And to the extent that managers, at the end of the day, we're all trying to invest differently than our benchmark. Otherwise, we would just be passive. And that's how we add value, by taking more or less risk relative to the benchmark. So we expect our managers to do that. Otherwise, we're paying them fees for nothing. But we'll look at overall we'll look at the exposure for every manager and benchmark them accurately. And in terms of the WRS portfolio, so our benchmark return is each asset class return times its benchmark return. And our total portfolio return is just the sum of all of our managers, regardless of which asset class they were in. So it doesn't it doesn't have an impact on our total performance.
Okay. Any other questions for Sam? Seeing none, go ahead, please proceed.
Mr. Chairman, I'll be short. I'll just make a couple of comments. In your packet, you should have received our statutory report due to you and the Capital and Finance Committee by 1 November. As we forecast in the August meeting, the team did beat their benchmark. The final numbers were as the WRS portfolio over a rolling 3-year period had a return of 10.38%. The benchmark was only 8.71. And so we beat the benchmark by 1.67%. That represents about $487 million in additional value over the benchmark. And the compensation earned for the team for this period is $768,607. And we paid out $192,000 of that on 30 September as the first tranche. It's a 3-year payout, 25% in 1 year, 25% year 2, 50% in year 3. The peer ranking is, of course, less important, but we are ranking in the top 10% of peer plans rated by our investment consultant, and we're pretty proud of the performance. I would point out a couple of things. The benchmark is not an easy bar to get over. Some folks think, well, we've had this thing in place since 2019, Mr. Chairman. It seems like we have beat the benchmark, and so something must be up. Not so, I tell you. The reason is because you compare our benchmark performance, which I said was 8.71%, to all the peer systems out there. Our investment consultant, reviews a portfolio of peer systems, about 60 funds, all of whom are public funds with assets over $1 billion. The median fund over the last 3 years, that same reporting period, only earned 8.28. They did not beat our benchmark. In fact, our benchmark return, if you were to rank it as a manager, would rank in the 39th percentile. We beat 60% of the funds out there with our benchmark, let alone our performance, which is above that. When half of the funds out there aren't beating your benchmark, that tells you that it's a realistic hurdle to get over. It's not a easy bar, and there will be years where we don't get over. But so far, we've done very well. I want to make sure that everybody understands that the board really can't escape their, or the team can't escape the board imposed asset allocation. Makita reports on compliance with those targets, and we have an overlay system to keep the system within limits. Russell Investments, if we make a bet on the US stock market that we think the market's going to pop, so we go to the max of our range, and then we're right. I hope we're right. Well, overnight, you can be over the limit, right? Russell sees that because they rebalance daily, and they will see that, and they would short the market for us and take our exposure back for us. So we have a automatic system to make sure that we're staying on target with the asset allocation and not exceeding it. I can go through the timeline and some of the independent checks that are involved here, but in the end, as I think we've expressed to this committee before, the data inputs to this are independent from the team. The board establishes the asset allocation with the consultant advice. The investment funds committee approves that asset or those benchmarks and that against that asset allocation. And the data for both the benchmark performance and the team's performance is from the independent investment consultant, not from the team. As Tom had talked about, the board is not enthralled to do an additional audit or throw additional costs at this. As a staff officer, though, I'm certainly willing to do whatever is deemed fit. And Mr. Chairman, I believe this bill is going to be, the primacy on the bill is going to go to the CapFin committee. Is that my understanding?
That was the initial.
Okay. But anyway, so we'll see where it goes. We'll do whatever needs to be done because this is a really important program. These results are really the result of Sam and his team being stable, and you only get stability if you have fair compensation. This is a way to get there. I think the program's been very successful. One of the committee's questions always is, it's a great question, is the program accomplishing its goals? And it is. We've had good retention, good stability, and good results.
Okay, other comments? Further questions? Okay, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dave, so if the Russell 3000 is your benchmark, does it not make sense that before the investment period starts, the board just says if you're in the upper 10% percentile, that you get your performance bonus? Now, I know that's oversimplified, but explain to me why we cannot set a benchmark based on whatever indices you use, which I know what you do, but so laymen can understand at the end of the investment period.
Well, the investment period, the measurement period starts every 1 July. It's a rolling 3-year period at this point. And the benchmarks are set ahead of that. So, and they correspond to the asset allocation that is set by the board. How much is going to be in stocks, how much in emerging market stocks, how much in fixed income, X% plus or minus with a range. And that is set by the board to make sure that we have a diversified portfolio. And it's the result of some extensive work by the board, working with our consultant to do various modelings. If you had this asset allocation, how is it going to perform in this kind of an environment? How would it perform in a different kind of environment? You stress test it. And so out of that comes the board's asset allocation. And then the benchmarks are designed to be, or selected and approved by the board and approved by the IFC as being representative of that asset class. And so all that's done ahead of time before the investment period starts. And so Sam knows what the rules are and what the asset limitations are, and we know how we're going to grade it.
Okay, any other questions?
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
One other question, it might be for LSO, but if this is a CapFin bill, are we able to put amendments on it?
The answer is it'll come back to us.
And excuse me, Mr. Chairman, in that time, then we would do our amendments. Okay.
Correct. And we'll discuss the bill a little bit after we're done taking testimony, public comment. And we can make recommendations to CapFin on the bill as well for amendments. Okay, all right. Anything else? Sam? So, all of us are tickled pink about the performance of state retirement, and it's, keep up the good work. Yeah, I mean, with current interest rates, it ought to be a little bit easier. We'll see. Make more money and beat your benchmarks, both. Okay, all right, let's move on over. Welcome.
Thank you, Chairman Nicholas. Members of the JAC. My name is Norman LeBlanc. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for the State Treasurer's Office, and I'd like to thank the Treasurer's Office again. Thank you again for making the PCP program, the Performance Compensation Program, available for the State Treasurer's Office. As Dave Swindell has said, certainly it helps to retain staff and it helps to drive performance. While we're thankful for that, we think that was a very significant first step. We think it's now time to expand the PCP to include the financial accounting team. Our objective is the recruitment and retention of qualified and experienced investment accounting, middle office, and operations staff capable of continuing to effectively support the investment team as it employs ever more sophisticated techniques in ever greater volume to produce returns in excess of benchmark. Simply stated, a fully staffed and stable financial accounting team unlocks the opportunity for the investment team to invest in a broad range of strategies. And the lack of requisite skills in that team or instability in that team restricts the investment universe and dampens returns. And of course, our goal is to provide the highest total return for any level of risk. Our two challenges, which are on the first page of the presentation, are first the recruitment of staff with the base level of skills that we need, which is a challenge. And the second challenge is the retention of that staff once the State Treasurer's Office has equipped them with highly marketable skills. The Chief Financial Officer for the State Treasurer's Office, Katie Smith, has provided a memo detailing the specialized tasks that our team performs and would like to present a summary right now, if it please you, of the specialized skills that these employees have. Katie?
Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Norm. If you are willing to listen. So good afternoon. Like he said, like Norm said, I am Katie Smith. I am the CFO for the State Treasurer's Office. Per the request of this committee on August 29th, I prepared a memo, which should be in your meeting materials, listing out the responsibilities and distinguishing the difference between an accounting professional with the State Treasurer's Office and an accounting professional with the state. First and foremost, the State Treasurer's Office accounting professionals must understand and implement not only governmental accounting principles, but also investment accounting principles. What is the difference? Well, governmental accounting is comprised of the principles and guidelines that all state accountants must practice to ensure the fiscal health of the state. Investment accounting is the unique subset of additional principles, terminology, and guidelines that must be followed to ensure the fiscal health of investments, or in our case, the health of the state of Wyoming Sovereign Wealth Fund, which is now valued at $27 billion. To put it simply, State Treasurer's Office accountants must be able to account for 13 investment asset classes stretched across 78 investment managers, allocated to 13 unique investment pools, funded by cash from just over 400 funds. It is important to note that not all of our investment managers are external, meaning not all are hired firms that invest the funds on our behalf, but rather State Treasurer's Office investment professionals invest the cash directly. Our investment team functions as 15 internal investment managers, both in fixed income and equities. This requires our accounting professionals to ensure investment trades are settled and allocated properly through an order management system. When a trade fails, it's the responsibility of the State Treasurer's Office accounting professionals to resolve the issues with the brokers to mitigate those consequences. All investment funds generate investment earnings. The investment earnings on the state's sovereign wealth fund contributes a third of the state's general fund revenue. In order to ensure investment earnings are recorded correctly, it requires complex monthly calculation and reconciliation for each of those individual 78 investment managers and distribution to all 400 plus state funds in WOLF's, the state accounting system. As you know, the distribution process for investment earnings is not as easy as you earn it, you get it. Rather, earnings are redirected to other funds based on legislation. Any one redirection requires additional reconciliation and tracking. At the end of each year, additional calculations and transfers are made to complete 4 unique spending policies set by law. But just in case if that's not keeping us busy enough, we have 3 additional investment portfolios to administer, account, and manage. These portfolios are the WildStar 1, WildStar 2, and the newly added DEQ reclamation bond. All these additional portfolios involve investment of non-state dollars and require us to follow all investment accounting principles and guidelines. The State Treasurer's Office takes great pride in the accuracy and transparency of cash and investments for the state. To be confident that all cash and investments are accounted for properly, the State Treasurer's Office not only maintains financial information in WOLF's, the state accounting system, but also maintains a separate set of financial information in our investment accounting software. These 2 systems are consistently reconciled to each other and to our custodian bank. We are now required to provide that 3-way reconciliation to legislature quarterly. However, before anything, we must have cash. The State Treasurer's Office accounting professionals are responsible for the collection, expenditure, and reconciliation of all state cash via the state's depository bank and the state's custodian bank. This involves daily execution and approval of transactions up to tens to hundreds of millions of dollars a day, including all wires for the state. Once the required revenue is collected, the State Treasurer's Office is then responsible for the statewide distributions to external entities, so our municipalities. These distributions are complex and require various calculations, different cadence intervals, and often threshold tracking. The State Treasurer's Office accounting professionals also find themselves having to facilitate and execute and manage loans. These loans can range from interfund loans to external party loans and require all the prudent accounting such as interest rate calculations and amortization schedules. Each year, the State Treasurer's Office accounting professionals play a vital role in the completion of the ACFR, which is our annual comprehensive financial report. Every agency must report for the ACFR, but what sets us apart is that the State Treasurer's Office not only completes the standard agency reporting to the State Auditor's Office, but we also report hundreds of documents directly to the external auditors and prepare all the cash and investment journal entries. The State Treasurer's Office is cash and investments for the state of Wyoming, which means we touch every aspect of the state's financials. This includes note 3, where we also report 3 additional GASBs for our investments. I hope these distinctions have proven helpful to identify the difference between a State Treasurer's Office accounting professional from other state accounting professionals. And I truly want to express my deep gratitude for your time and attention. Thank you.
So we have this pool of very experienced and talented people. We're trying to complete the team. We find that difficult. That's a challenge, recruiting. And we also need to retain this staff who now have a specialized skill set that the private sector prizes, in particular around trading and accounting for trading. So what we propose is establishing a performance compensation pool, which is 100% funded by and dependent upon portfolio outperformance or alpha. Only when the investment team outperforms are bonuses paid. The PCP currently allows up to 2% of performance above benchmark or that alpha to be used to fund an investment team bonus pool. That investment team bonus pool is approximately 1.2 million. What we propose is that after fully funding the investment team's performance compensation pool, any remaining portion of the 2% overall pool would be directed to performance compensation for financial accountants until their pool is filled. And just for context, we're talking about a pool that would be about $169,000. That's the full extent of the pool. As with the investment team, the amount payable to each financial accountant would be subject to a cap or a target based on a percentage of their salary. And targets would range between 5% and 20% of salary, depending upon the seniority of the role. I just want to repeat that for a second. 5% to 20% of salary, depending upon the seniority of the role. How would we set those targets? At the beginning of each fiscal year, management sets clear, observable, and measurable objectives for each individual. These goals are designed to align the incentives of the individual with the goals of the organization. Those goals are communicated and agreed with each individual before the beginning of the year. Everyone knows what is expected of them, when they get paid, how they get paid, and when they don't get paid. And how do we determine those? At the end of each fiscal year, each member of the financial accounting team would be reviewed as part of an annual process to determine the percent of the target that they might receive. The review begins with an initial determination by their supervisors up to the CFO, and then is reviewed by a panel made up of the senior management of the state treasurer's office. Lastly, the treasurer would approve the overall bonus package. And we feel that this collaborative and management reviewed process should ensure that the result is fair to all parties and mitigates any personal biases. Given the size of the individual awards, we would propose that those be paid in December following the fiscal year end, rather than being paid over 3 years. Having spoken to this committee twice before on this topic, it was clear that some committee members indicated they preferred adjusting salaries for financial accountants rather than implementing performance compensation. A potential path forward involving that might be to bill the expected financial accountant performance compensation, $169,000, into salaries. And we would sort of refer to this as the total compensation approach. So try to make total compensation, which in our case would be paid in salary, equal to what people might expect to earn in salary plus bonus in alternative employment. If paired with an effort to review total compensation versus industry surveys each biennium, so we don't fall behind, that total compensation approach may help us achieve our objectives. The pros for that are that salary for the state treasurer's office financial accountants would, in theory, approximately equal the salary plus bonus opportunity that they might otherwise leave for. That should reduce turnover. It should help us to recruit. And of course, then the knock-on effect is that it should help us to continue to perform in the way that the investment team has performed. The cons, however, are that the lack of a variable cash flow at the end of the year kind of limits our ability for management to incentivize behaviors that promote increased performance. If it's baked into salary, it's deserved. regardless necessarily of effort. And we feel that it is important to incentivize people. Also, that approach would replace a variable cost, which is dependent on the achievement of performance goals, with a fixed cost. And of course, we would prefer to have the variable cost. The state treasurer's office preference, therefore, would be to have performance compensation because it better aligns the interests of all the parties and is a more effective management tool. In addition, if you look at the base salaries for our positions generally, and there is a huge outlier here in some of the more senior positions, but generally, salaries are in line with available industry surveys. What's missing is the bonus opportunity. So we feel like we fixed the problem by addressing the direct problem. We also believe that evidence suggests that our departing accountants are leaving for similar salaries, but they're getting a bonus opportunity, and that's what they're leaving for. In 2 cases at the accountant level, we had someone leave to get the same salary but got a performance bonus. In another, we had an accountant go for a reduced salary, but had a bonus ability. There is, at the more senior level, a salary gap we may need to address later. And we did have somebody as an accounting manager leave for double the salary plus an accounting bonus. So in conclusion, while we believe that the expansion of the performance compensation plan to include financial accountants is best accomplishes our objective, a total compensation approach, i.e. raising salaries, also could be an effective method for achieving our objective. And we want to work with the committee to reach a solution that gets us to our goal, which is being able to recruit and retain the team that we need to support the investment team's drive to achieve returns. And we understand the committee's concerns, and we look forward to engaging in a dialogue to address this issue in a timely and effective manner. I'll stand down for any questions now. Please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Currently, how many folks are in the investment side are on that performance comp?
10 people, approximately, if fully paid out, 1.2 million.
Do they do or perform all full-time the activities that you that Katie
The
has
10 people
listed?
we're talking about, sorry, Mr. Chairman, if I may, the 10 people I think I was being asked about was the investment team, and that was Representative Walter's question, which I was answering. I believe, sir, you were talking about the financial accountants. And the financial accountants, there are 18 people on the financial accounting team. And the way that we organize the team, because it is a small team, is that we load balance. So no one does exclusively work for the investment team and nothing else. And no one does nothing else and doesn't impact the investment team. When you're a small team, you have to load balance. There is a pace at which things happen. And we can't stand by strict walls around what someone can and cannot do.
So when you load balance, are you load balancing other accounting work within the office?
If we need to, we are doing exactly that.
Mr. Chairman?
Go ahead.
I'm not fully understanding how you call this performance compensation. An accountant's going to do their job. It's not like the investment people where you can set a benchmark and they either exceed the benchmark or they don't exceed the benchmark. So the only way I really see this working, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is it would be tied to the same benchmark. And if the investment folks get their bonus for the year, then the accountants would get the bonus based on your proposal of 20% for an accounting manager. Accounting one manager would get 15, et cetera, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
Is that what you're referencing? This would only be paid in the event that the investment team itself exceeds benchmarks to where there's a reason for a performance bump. Otherwise, to just say, I really like the way Katie does her job is kind of subjective and random and really not a performance bump. So how do you plan to tie this to anything? Because in all you're talking, I couldn't extrapolate what you were getting to in that regard.
Mr. Chair, if I may, the first thing I'd like to do is correct a gross misconception. The investment team is not solely responsible for investment performance. The investment team is allowed to do their job only if you can account for it. If you cannot support their investment, they are not allowed to do the investment. If you cannot set up the accounts, if you cannot do the work that is required for an investment manager to come on board, you cannot hire them. If the investment team wants to engage in a new strategy that is more sophisticated and takes more time and effort on the accounting side, and the accounting side is scrambling to do the basics, they have to say no. If they say no, you don't get performance. If they say no, you don't get to do. So, in recognition of the fact that the financial accounting team is providing the platform upon which the investment team can actually do their jobs without their hands tied behind their back, you pay them a bonus when there is, and only when there is, outperformance. So the investment team recognizes, the group recognizes that an investment performance is a team effort. And if the benchmarks are made, and only if they're made, and only if the investment team is fully paid their bonus, does any money go to fund the bonus for the financial accountants pool.
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to try and summarize what you spent quite a while explaining there. You're back to the point of, if the investment team beats the benchmark, then the performance would go to the accountants. Simple question.
Mr. Chair, yes, sir.
Thank you.
And I think I heard likewise, there's this collaborative effort within that. But so then, but there's a breakout between the investment team and the accounting team. So then how do you determine within those accounting teams that one is, there's got to be some way of measuring their performance that says that they're really contributing to that. But I've not heard that explanation, because I see it on the investment side as you've explained that in the past.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm trying to figure out how you recognize that maybe if it's collaborative, they make, they make sure everything's in place for the investment team to accomplish everything they want to do. But yet there's components of that. How do you make that determination that they're meeting that?
Mr. Chair, Representative Larson, that's a very good question. And what happens is that at the very beginning of the year, you set for each individual a set of clear, observable, and measurable goals. Those goals are aligned with the goals of the organization. Now, the goals of the organization clearly are to produce investment performance. So in setting those goals, we would speak with the investment team. We would understand what the investment team was trying to accomplish, where they were trying to go, what new things they wanted to do, what pace they wanted to do things at. For example, we sat down with them recently and understood that they have 9 new private asset managers that they would hope to have in the pipeline over the next 18 months or so. And we would set up those targets for the financial accountants to make sure that they were enabling that they were doing the extra work required to enable that.
That in mind, if they weren't able to do that, their goals, they didn't reach their goals, but they still exceeded the benchmarks, is there the potential then that they would not get their bonus because they didn't meet their goals?
Mr. Chairman, yes, in fact, Representative Larson, that's exactly how it works, because what would happen in the review of the individual bonuses is that the CIO, the deputy CIO, the treasurer and the deputy treasurer would all look at the individual objective. The CFO will have looked at the individual objective and say, did this person do what they needed to do to ensure that the investment team could make that investment? If the answer is no, they get zeroed. Done.
Mr. Chairman. So, Mr. Chairman, conversely, based on that explanation, it appears that an accountant could meet their goals and be deserving of the bonus, even if the alpha is not met, because the investment overall, the markets decline and the investment doesn't meet the benchmark, but the accountants did everything under their will to get it there. So could they still be paid a bonus under this scenario based on your previous description?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Walters, you know, it's sort of like a football game, right? If the offense goes out and scores 50 points and the defense gives up 61, the offense did their job, the defense didn't, you still lost. And that's how we look at it. It's a team and we're winning together and we're losing together. And if we're doing the job as a team to provide the investment returns for the people of Wyoming, then that's what we're trying to do. And people are rewarded on that basis. So yes, in fact, you may have a year where as a financial accountant, you did everything you could do and it didn't, and the investment performance wasn't there and you don't get paid in that year. There may be other years where you did what you needed to do. And you know, you got, and you were paid. But that's just the way that we've structured it so that we stay within that 2% cap for performance. Now we're willing to think about it from a salary perspective. Again, the total compensation approach, if you're more comfortable with that surety.
My next final question would really be for Treasurer Meyer or Deputy Williams. With the proposal, we go from 10 to add 18. That's 28 of the 42 people in the office that would be on some sort of performance compensation. That's almost making the agency an independent agency. We're getting quite high there. And one of those 42, I believe, is the treasurer himself in the office. So as other agencies then look inward at the treasurer's office, they start to think that's the place to be, and I'm abandoning ship anywhere else in state government. So how do we rationalize and justify that next component?
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Chairman, Don Williams, Deputy State Treasurer. If frankly, Representative Walters, if we could steal them away, we would take them. We want the best and the brightest, no matter where they come from. And we would advocate that if they come from state government, that would be great. We haven't had a lot of luck with folks in state government, frankly, where our competition is with accountants outside of state government.
Senator Salazar? No. Representative Henderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. From a fiscal management standpoint, how would you define, you know, your enough is enough on your team, you know, going forward?
Mr. Chairman, could I ask Representative Henderson, could you clarify your question? Because I'm not quite sure I understood it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just building on a former question related to the size and the rate of growth. And how do we justify that in terms of, you know, obviously you want to adjust your team to meet your requirements and on circumstances. But if, for example, technology and transaction efficiencies merited a reduction, what would that factor in? But more importantly, at what point would you consider your team is the right size?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Henderson, there are studies including one done for this body that provide guidelines for the correct ratio of financial accounting, middle office, operational staff to investment staff and to size of portfolio and complication and complexity of portfolio. We would clearly be guided by those ratios. In addition, if we need additional staff as we grow, and remember that we're taking more internal rather than external management, and we are moving to a total rate of return posture on new funds, which takes more private equity investment, which means more work on the financial accounting side. If we do need additional staff, we must come and ask for that staff. We don't have the ability to add staff or add positions or change levels. We would ask for that and we'd have to make the case.
Further questions? Okay, anything else? No?
Time.
Okay, any other testimony from the Treasurer's Office on this issue? Okay. So, Katie, I do have one question, and this, based on your description of the work that your accountants do, have you presented that to ANI and compared that to their current accounting positions, other accounting positions in the state of Wyoming government, and how those measure up in terms of the type of work and the quality of work and the sophistication of the work as compared? And if so, when did you do that and what happened?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. So I'll probably defer to our HR expert, which is our deputy treasurer. But we have had those discussions with ANI years ago. I would say we first broached this. This is when we started reclassing positions up at higher levels. So just for context, our entry level accountant is a FIAC 10. That is usually a supervisory role in other agencies. So we've tried to level up the accountant to be able to get higher quality, more experienced, educated professionals, but that is deeming to still not meet the mark.
I recall those discussions now that you mentioned. Okay, further questions? Okay, any public comment on this? Seeing none, we will close public comment. Committee, do we have a preference or any motions that we'd like to make from the committee? I don't see any motions coming up now, but we'll continue these discussions. Thank you for the presentation. All right, next is on our agenda. I gotta find it. EEQ, yeah. Oh, no, if you want to give an update on the. Okay, no, please proceed with that. Yeah, go ahead, sorry. Yeah, if you prepared something, we want to hear.
Oh, that's so kind. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Madam Chairman. It won't take too long. Good afternoon. As you know, I'm Dawn Williams, the Deputy State Treasurer. The news in our financial accounting group this time of year is all things audit. We've met all of our deadlines so far and are on schedule to meet our next big one on October 31st. We continue to work with our partners, the State Auditor's Office and our external auditors, which is MHP, to answer questions. It's not, we don't just submit documents and then they're done. Those documents then have to be audited. So the auditors come, we work very closely with them. So our folks are on tap throughout the process and into December answering questions for the audit. We're continuing to work on our accounting system upgrade. We've implemented 8 new reports that are proving to be just as effective as we'd hoped they'd be. We're very excited about the success there. We are right now paralleling those reports, which means we're using the new reports and we're still doing the things the old way just to make sure that the new reports are running before we're fully trusting. And we're probably going to do that through the month of December. But we are, so we haven't seen a modified workload, but we anticipate that is coming soon. And then we'll head right into adjusting for the total rate of return, getting all of the system ready for that in July. We are also working diligently on gathering manager data from our managers, but that project is ongoing and will be for quite some time. We do, like Katie mentioned, we have 78 managers. All of them want to give us their information in a different way, in a different format, and it's proving it just takes a long time. But we do give you monthly reports for our workforce. Our workflow automation report is what we call it every month, and we send you an update on how that's going. The investment team continues to perform. The market value of the state's portfolio increased 2.9 billion in fiscal year 23. So we're up to 27.3 billion market value as of June 30th this year. So that's pretty exciting. And since I saw you last, speaking of investments, we've fully staffed our investment division. This is the first time ever we've had all 10 positions filled. So that's awesome. In the financial accounting division, however, we're still down 2 principal accountants. These are just positions we just haven't been able to fill. We recently hired an executive assistant, but we still need a legal assistant. We've had a couple different positions lately where folks have accepted the job, and then the day before they were supposed to start said, I changed my mind or I took a different job. So that's been a little frustrating. So we continue to search. Our attorney position remains vacant, but we actually have some prospects, which is very exciting. I want to thank you for the increased salary, was very helpful. We had a really good meeting with the HR division. They met with all the agencies to talk about consolidation. As you know, that hasn't been my favorite thing. It still isn't, but it was a productive conversation. And as a result of that, they did reclassify our position again, our attorney position, not where we wanted it, but it did remove one of the things we were running into was a 10-year experience requirement. And so this reclassification did remove that. And then I paid for some additional advertising and we were able to attract a couple more candidates. So that's a positive thing. The treasurer and I are so proud of the highly talented and motivated group of professionals that we have assembled. We look forward to filling these remaining positions with folks of equal caliber. And as I just alluded to, we don't just put a seat in a chair in the treasurer's office. We make sure they have to be up to the task. And so we're lucky to have the people that we do. October is a busy time for our unclaimed property folks, since November is the due date for holders to turn their property over to us. This team is fantastic. They continue to churn out payments to claimants and set records. In fact, in FY23, we received over $16 million in new property, which compares to almost $13 million in FY22. So over almost $3.5 million more dollars that we took in. And they paid out $2.5 million more in FY23 than 22. So we're just churning them, collecting that money and turning it right back out. They issued 9,580 checks in the past fiscal year, which was 1,500 more checks than the previous year. So we have asked for in our budget, we've requested an additional position for the unclaimed property group because in recognition of the fact that we just have such a much higher volume of claimants that are responding and property that's being turned over. So just giving you a heads up there that we hope that you'll look at that favorably. Treasurer, do you have any comments like that?
Just one thing that we also have done is before we got there, the banks have just so we're getting into the safety deposit boxes and making headway on that. We had banks across all of Wyoming that just had full boxes and with unclaimed property in them. So we built some mini safety deposit boxes in one of our rooms, and they come in there. You know, we get a whole load of stuff from one bank. You know, and so we'll bring them in there and they'll sort them all out. It's I guess an interesting scavenger hunt or however you want to call it, but we're actually relocating some gold and silver and some other precious things back to different folks. Yeah. What is that? That's Storage Wars or whatever? Yeah. Okay. So yeah, but that's something that I think is really exciting. I guess to a little bit, if I digress to the last point, is that our employees are really kind of interesting where they'll go in and there's a lot of cross training. And so when somebody walks out the door, you lose a lot more than 3 or 4 months getting somebody up to speed, because once you get them all cross-trained around the different desks, you may lose, a year of training. So anything we can do to keep those people there, so we don't lose that experience, would really be a blessing.
Are they full-time? How much are we, and what's the process in that? And how long will they continue to be there?
Mr. Chairman, so we continue this project, these reports that I spoke about, we'll go through, once those are fully paralleled and tested, we'll go through another iteration of reports. The manager's data accumulation will be occurring, like I said, over the next year. We meet with them regularly, at minimum once a week, if not more than once. Norman has taken a large role in overseeing that project and working with, in conjunction with our Chief Technology Officer, who he and Katie are very involved. So we've just added another person in our office to the team. And then they are fully engaged with us. And Norman does a really good job of keeping their feet to the fire. And but they're good partners for us. They've been our vendor for a number of years, and so they want to keep our business, and so it's a good relationship. But it will take some time.
Okay, further questions?
Question, Mr. Chairman?
Go ahead.
Thank you. You said you were 2 down in your accounting division right now?
Sure, that's correct.
And help me out here. How many people in the last 3 years have we increased total?
Mr. Chairman, 5.
So 5 and we're 2 short. So we've added 3 and we still have 2 empty, or we've added 5 and we still have 2 to go. Okay, so and how many were there when you started?
Mr. Chairman, I think we had 8 people. I think we've grown quite a little bit. I know that math isn't, it seems like
It's small, 5, 6, 7 people. I feel like we've doubled.
If you could.
I'll clarify that, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, if you could, that would be great. And just a comment that I too am deeply gratified that you've done such a great job in getting that forward. I've talked to the auditors and they too sing your praises about how well you've done to get the information, to get the ACFR out on time. And I know I appreciate it, and I know all taxpayers do. So good job. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator.
Thanks, Katie. Kurt? Okay, anything else with the Treasurer's Office or retirement? Anything else we might have missed? Any public comment on either retirement or Treasurer's Office? I think we're done with that. All right, DEQ is up next. Bill, real quickly, that we have in front of us, because it's a very simple bill. Is that right?
Say that
Should we
again.
jump right to the bill? You
Yeah.
know, just, yeah, okay. So go ahead, Representative Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. The Department of Environmental Quality, which I have as one of my assignments on this committee, Director Parfit approached me during the interim and informed me that within the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, there's $10 million a year that's scheduled to come to the state to address in the traditional AML funding program. In the IIJA, there's a provision in that 10 million a year that allows the DEQ to take up to 10%, so 3 million a year, and set aside in a separate account for unanticipated such things as unanticipated subsidence, emergencies, and fire. So we could set aside 3 million a year, up to 3 million a year in a separate account, but we need a separate account to comply with the guidance of the IIJA, and that's what, in essence, that's what this bill does. We worked with Brian and the director to draft this, and we go into the 3511 where we have abandoned mines, and we create a new account we create a new section 3511-1211 to create this account with the flexibility to allow them up to use that. The other important provision of this is that the income generated off these funds then also can be used. They have to go back into the account, but we get to keep them, which isn't always the case in that. So we get to keep those funds. As we reviewed this, Mr. Chairman, Madam Chairman, when we reviewed the AML Act, we found in 3511-1210 that what do we call that? The prior balance account balancing account. We had a balancing account in there that that in reviewing we no longer need. And so in section 2, where we see a repealer there, that is to repeal that balancing account, which is no longer needed.
So what's the reason of the reserve account? Is it needed? Why do we need it? A create account plus a reserve account? Or that's what's being
Chairman.
repeated. Is that right?
Mr. Chairman, I believe, and I'm sorry to interrupt, but I believe that the reason it's useful is because they reinstituted the spend it in 3 years or you lose it rule in
I think it's being-
2021.
Yeah. Go ahead, Alan.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. So good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. To introduce myself, I'm Alan Edwards. I'm the Deputy Director for the Department of Environmental Quality. I'm also serving as the Administrator of the Industrial Siting Division until the new full-time administrator comes on December 1st. I would also note that Don Newton is here with me. He's the current administrator. As a certified state, the 3-year limitation on being able to expend the funds doesn't actually apply to certified programs, such as Wyoming. That would apply to the uncertified. The purpose of the fund is that when there's no further funding coming into the program, there is a source of funds to allow ongoing and continued work in this area. Wyoming's experience is that even though the inventory is updated every year, we're always finding new things that come to light, new problems that need attention. So this fund is basically set aside to provide a source of funding for the program that would exist after the influx of funds from the federal funding is no longer being distributed to Wyoming.
Any public comment on the bill?
Mr.
Okay,
Chairman,
go ahead, Art.
thank you. I can't help myself. For Mr. Edwards, I do have a couple of questions. One is this related to the B11 that came through in February of 2023? It was a B11 for about $9.69 million, or is that unrelated to this present situation?
I'm not personally familiar with that, Mr. Chairman. I'm not personally familiar with that particular B11, but the 9.6 million would correspond to approximately the annual receipt from bill that Wyoming receives.
And Mr. Chairman, so Mr. Edwards, is it fair to say that the purpose of this proposed draft bill is to conform Wyoming law to changes in federal law?
Mr. Chairman, yes, that would be correct. The language that's in here is a mirror of what's in the bill language.
So, Mr. Chairman, so if there were other discrepancies between Wyoming's implementation of the AML program and the spending priorities specified in federal law and the Surface Mining Control Reclamation Act of 1977, would you be in favor of making those conforming changes so that Wyoming's priorities match up with federal priorities?
Mr. Chairman, obviously, if there is a difference between the two, we would be more than willing and more than happy to look at those differences and see what the consequences are. And we would much rather review it and then get back with a response.
Mr. Chairman, finally, I understand there's a good project that was done in the town of Hannah to construct a football field and an athletic track with six lanes. My understanding that was that AML money was used for that, which I think is a great project, and it seems like it's eligible to me. But explain to me your view of why that expenditure was eligible for AML funding.
Mr. Chairman, I'd be more than happy to do that. Excuse me?
Go ahead.
No, I would be more than happy to address that. AML reclamation tends to disturb a lot of the surface. The AML program has always gone back in and restored the surface that was required to be disturbed as part of the reclamation activities. In the case of Hannah, the mine subsidence was extensive all over the area to the west of the school. That included the football field, the track, and the mine voids in that area were extremely shallow, including some that were occasionally poked their nose up to the surface. So it was necessary as part of the reclamation to completely remove everything. And that resulted in removing the football field and all the facilities thereof. As part of the program, those facilities that existed in the past were restored afterwards. It's much similar to the Little League baseball field in Rock Springs that was reclaimed, and then the baseball field was restored to its original condition. So I think it would be important to note that that particular football field was not done simply to build a new football field. It had a direct reclamation nexus.
Chairman, last question. So for some of our other programs, like the Business Ready Communities or Mineral Royalty Grant Program, there's an application process for cities and municipalities to apply to a state agency, and then that gets decided by a decision maker whether to approve those. It's my understanding that there's no similar application process for AML funds. So if a municipality believes that a particular project were eligible for AML, would you object to having an application process set up so that a city could apply for AML funds for a specific project?
Mr. Chairman, there is no application process provisions included under SMACRA or the bill provision. As a matter of fact, under SMACRA, the priorities have a very specific requirement that have to be evaluated and determined. OSM has provided guidance documents that determine how those priorities would be established. So it would not, in fact, be an application process. I would state, though, that if a community felt that there was a project that was deserving of attention that wasn't somewhere on the list, DEQ would be more than happy to obtain that information and consider that. but it could only be done in accordance with the priority criteria as established under the Surface Mining Conservation and Recovery Act. Control, excuse me, and Recovery Act.
Thank you very much.
So is there a motion on the bill? Moved and seconded? Any further discussion on the bill? Question being called on bill, roll call.
Public comment.
We did that.
Did that.
Members of the committee, the motion is do pass on 24 LSO 0199 working draft 0.7. Representative Henderson. Representative Lawson. Representative Sherwood.
Aye.
Representative Stiff.
Aye.
Representative Walters.
Aye.
Representative Swannesser Dave.
Aye.
Senator Anderson. Senator Guru.
Aye.
Senator Kinski.
Aye.
Senator Salazar. Co-Chairman Nethercott. Chairman Nicholas.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, the motion is adopted. House bill or Senate file?
That will be a house since it's got Lloyd's name on it. Okay,
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you.
you bet. Thank you, Alan. Good to see you. Okay, Don. What else is on our list? Boom, done early. You're welcome. Surprised you, didn't we?
Did I redeem myself?
Only because I cut off.
Yeah. Okay, Don wants to talk about tomorrow. Our timing.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, on the agenda for tomorrow. Again, a full day, starting off with workers' compensation and unemployment. You have two bills which will be presented by the agencies. These are outgrowth of your July meeting. And then there are three bills that modify three different pension plans and require additional contributions to those three plans: the law enforcement plan, the judicial retirement, and the patrol and warden plan. After lunch, or maybe beginning a little before lunch and continuing after lunch, is a discussion of the actuarially determined contribution rates. This applies only to the big plan and does not have any legislation associated with that. It's more of a educational discussion. The balance of the afternoon is an update on ARPA funding from the Governor's Office and State Budget Department and the Capital Saturday Pilot Program. And then finally, Mr. Chairman, a discussion of the Veterans Home of Wyoming, and they have a capital construction budget request, which has already been before the State Building Commission.
Okay. Another easy day.
They have reports.
About 6 bills. Which will be exciting. So, all right. Any comments, any from the committee? If not, we will stand and